Book 6, Chapter 30, Part 1 of Marie Antoinette and Her Son. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach, Baronne de Richemont. Thus passed weeks, months, and even years, and on the gloomy horizon of France arose a new constellation, and from the blood-spotted, corpse-strewn soil of the French Republic sprang an armed warrior, a solitary one, but one to whom millions were soon to bow, and who, like the divinity of battles, was to control the destinies of nations and of princes. This one solitary man was General Bonaparte, the same young man who in the first bloody days of the French Revolution beheld the storm at the Tuileries and expressed his regret to his companion, the actor Talma, that the king did not command his soldiers to mow down the canaille with grape-shot. The young lieutenant of that day, who had been the friend of the actor, dividing his loaf and his dinner with him, had now become General Bonaparte. And this general was serving the same people which, as a lieutenant, he had wanted to mow down with grape-shot. At the siege of Toulon, in the close contests with the Allies against the Republic, and in the Italian campaign of 1794, Bonaparte had so distinguished himself that the eyes of the French government were already directed to him. And no one could be surprised at the action of General Beauharnais' widow, the fair Josephine, in giving her hand to the young and extraordinary man. This marriage had not only brought happiness to Bonaparte, but it satisfied his ambition. Josephine was the friend of Barras and Tallien, the chief magistrates of the Republic at that time, and through her influence the young Bonaparte was sent to Italy to assume the chief command of the French army there. A general of 26 years to have the direction of an army whose 4 corps were commanded by Generals Messina, Orgeres, Serrurier, and La Harpe. The father of Junet, the late Duke d'Abrantz, wrote at that time to his son, who was with the French army in Italy, "Who is this General Bonaparte? Where has he served? Does anybody know anything about him?" And Junet, who was then the faithful friend and the admirer of Bonaparte, replied to his father, "You ask me who General Bonaparte is. I might answer, in order to know who he is, you must be he. I can only say to you that so far as I am able to judge him, he is one of those men with whom nature groans and only brings forth in a century." Had Junet not replied to his father, the deeds of the young general would soon have done so. Presently, in all France, in all Italy, yes, in all Europe, there was not a man who could ask, "Who is General Bonaparte?" His name was in every mouth, and the soldiers adored the man who had stood victoriously at their head at Lodi and Milan, and borne the banner forward amid the murderous shower of balls at the bridge of Arcully. Diplomatists and statesmen wondered at him who had taken Venice, and compelled proud and hated Austria to make peace with the French Republic, which had brought Marie Antoinette to the scaffold. The Republicans and the Directory of the Republic feared Bonaparte, because they recognized an enemy of the Republic in him, and dreaded his growing power and increasing renown. On this account, General Bonaparte was recalled from the Italian army after peace had been made with Austria, and he returned to Paris. Still, he was so feared that the Directory of the Republic, in order to remove him, and at the same time to give occupation to his active spirit and his splendid abilities, proposed to Bonaparte to go with an army to Egypt and extend the glory of France to the distant east. Bonaparte entered with all his fiery nature into this idea, which Barras and Talleyrand had sought to inveigle him into, and all his time, his thoughts, and his energies were directed to this one purpose, to fit himself out with everything that should be needful to bring to a victorious end a long and stubborn war in a foreign land. A strong fleet was collected, and Bonaparte, as the commander of the many thousands who were to go to Egypt under him, called to his aid the most skilful, valiant, and renowned generals of the French army. It could not fail that one of the first and most eminent of these was General Kleber, and of course his young adjutant and nephew, Louis, accompanied him. On the 19th of April 1798, the French fleet left the harbour of Toulon and sailed toward the east, for, as Bonaparte said, only in the Orient are great realms and great deeds, in the Orient where 600 millions of men live. But these 600 millions have no army such as the French, no commander like Bonaparte, no generals like Murat, Junet, Desaix, and above all, Kleber. Kleber was the second in command. He shared his perils, he shared his victories, and with him was united his nephew Louis, a youth of 14 years, who, from his tall, slim figure, his gravity, and his ready understanding, would have passed at least for a youth of 18, and who, trained in the school of misfortune, belonged to those early matured natures which destiny has steeled, that they may courageously contend with and gain the victory over destruction. It was on the morning of the 3rd of July. The French army had disembarked and stood not far from Alexandria, on the ancient sacred soil of Egypt. Whatever was done must be done quickly, for Nelson was approaching with a fleet, prepared to contend with the French for the possession of Alexandria. Should the city not be taken before the arrival of the English fleet, the victory would be doubtful. Bonaparte knew this well. "Fortune gives us 3 days' time at the most," cried he, "and if we do not use them, we are lost." But he did use them. With fearful rapidity, the disembarkation of the troops was effected. With fearful rapidity, the French army arranged itself on Egyptian soil in 3 divisions, under Murat, Bon, and Kleber. Above them, all was he whose head had conceived the gigantic undertaking, he whose heroic spirit comprehended the whole. This was Bonaparte. After inspecting all the army and issuing his orders, he rode up the hill in company with his staff to the Pillar of Pompeii, in order to observe from that point the course of events. The army was advancing impetuously, and soon the city built by Alexander the Great must open its gates to his successor, Bonaparte the Great. After a short respite, the army advanced farther into the land of the pyramids. "Remember," cried Bonaparte to his soldiers, pointing to those monuments, "remember that 40 centuries look down upon you." And the pyramids of the great plain of Cairo beheld the glorious deeds and victories of the French army, beheld the overthrow of the Egyptian host. The Nile murmured with its blood-red waves the death song of the brave Mamelukes, and the 40 centuries which looked down from the pyramids were obliterated by the glorious victories that Bonaparte gained at the foot of those sacred monuments. A new epoch was to begin. The old epoch was buried for Egypt, and out of the ruins of past centuries a new Egypt was to be born, an Egypt which was to serve France and be tributary to it as a vassal. This was Bonaparte's plan, and he did everything to bring it to completion. He passed from battle to battle, from victory to victory, and after conquering Egypt and taking up his residence in Cairo, he at once began to organize the newly won country and to introduce to the idle and listless East the culture of the earnest and progressive West. But Egypt would not accept the treasures of culture at the hand of its conqueror. It rose again and again in rebellion against the power that held it down, and hurled its flaming torches of revenge against this hated enemy. A token of this may be seen in the dreadful revolt at Cairo, which began in the night of the 20th of October, and, after days of violence, ended with cruel cutting down of 6,000 Mamelukes. A proof of it may be seen in the constantly renewed attacks of swarms of Bedouins and Mamelukes on the French army. These hordes advanced even to the gates of Cairo and terrified the population, which had at last taken refuge beneath the foot of the conqueror. But Bonaparte succeeded in subjugating the hostile Bedouin tribes as he had already subjugated the population of the cities. He sent one of his adjutants, General Crozier, with a corps of brave soldiers into the desert to meet the emir of the hostile tribes. And Crozier won respect for the commands of his general. He succeeded in taking captive the whole body. A fearful sentence was inflicted on them. Before the eyes of their wives, their children, and their mothers, all the men of the tribe, more than 500 in number, were killed and their heads put into sacks. The howling and weeping women and children were driven to Cairo. Many perished of hunger on the road, or died beneath the sabre blows of their enemies, but more than 1,000 succeeded in reaching Cairo. They were obliged to encamp upon the great square El Bikir in the heart of Cairo, till the donkeys arrived which bore the dreadful spoils of victory in blood-dripping bags upon their backs. The whole population of Cairo was summoned to this gigantic square, and was obliged to look on while the sacks were opened and the bloody heads rolled out upon the sacred soil of Egypt. After this time, quiet reigned for a season. Horror had brought the conquered into subjection, and Bonaparte could continue his victorious course. He withdrew to Syria, taking with him Kleber and Kleber's young adjutant, the little Louis. He saw the horrors of war. He was there, the son of the kings of France, when the army of the Republic conquered the cities El Erish and Gaza. He took part by the side of Kleber in the storming of Jaffa. He was there when the captured Jaffa had to open its gates to the victors. He was there when, in the great caravanserai, 4,000 Turkish soldiers grounded their arms and surrendered themselves as prisoners, after receiving the promise that their lives should be spared. He was there too, the son of Marie Antoinette, when the unfortunates were driven down to the sea-coast and shot, in order that their enemies might be rid of them. He was there, the son of Louis XVI, when Bonaparte visited the pest-house in Jaffa. He walked through the sick-rooms at the side of his uncle Kleber, who noticed how the face of the young man, which had so often been calm in meeting death on the battlefield or in the storm of assault, now quivered, and the paleness of death swept over his cheeks. "What was the matter, my son?" asked Kleber as he returned home from this celebrated visit to the pest-house. "Why did you turn pale all at once, Louis?" "General," responded Louis, perplexed, "I know not how to answer." "You ought not to have gone with me to the hospital," said Kleber, shaking his head. "You know I didn't want you to go at first, but you insisted on it, and begged and implored so long that at last I had to yield and let you accompany us. But I'll confess it myself, it was a dreadful sight, these sick people with the swollen bodies, covered with blood and running sores. I understand now why you trembled and turned pale. You were afraid of this dreadful sickness." "No, General," answered Louis softly. "No, I have no fear. Did you not notice that I sprang forward and assisted General Bonaparte when he lifted up the poor sick man who lay on the floor before the door, and that I helped carry him into the room?" "I saw it, Louis, and I was much pleased with your courage, and was therefore surprised afterward when you turned pale and trembled. And I saw tears in your eyes. What agitated you all at once so much?" The young man slowly raised his head and looked at Kleber with his great blue eyes. "General," he said softly, "I myself do not know what agitated me so much. We were both standing before the dead of a sick man, to whom I handed a pitcher of water which he begged for earnestly. He fixed his great eyes upon me, and his quivering lips murmured, 'God bless you, all saints and angels protect you.' As he spoke these words, there resounded in my heart the echo of a time long since past. It seemed to me as if suddenly a dark curtain parted, and I looked as in a dream at a wondrous, brilliant spectacle. I saw a beautiful and dignified woman of princely figure, of noble, majestic nature. With her I saw 2 children, a girl and a boy, whom she led by the hand, and with whom she walked through a long hall which was filled with rows of beds. And as she walked there, it seemed as if the sun lightened up the dismal hall and illumined the pale faces of the sick ones. They raised themselves up in their beds and extended their thin, emaciated hands to the tall lady, and thanked her with earnest blessings for her visit and her comforting words. There was only one of the patients who did not rise, but lay stiff upon his bed, and moaned and sighed and whispered unintelligible words, which no one heeded, because the attention of all was fixed upon the great visitor. But the boy, who was walking by the side of the tall lady, had understood the sobs of the sick one. He left his mother, took the jug which stood upon a table between two beds, filled a glass with water from it, and held it to the dry, quivering lips of the sick one. He drank greedily, and then fixed his eyes upon the boy, and lisped the words, "God bless you, all saints and angels protect you." And all the people repeated aloud, "God bless you, all saints and angels protect you." The dignified lady stooped with a heavenly smile to her son, pressed a tender kiss upon his golden locks, and repeated the same words aloud. This general was the fantasy which suddenly appeared before my eyes when the patient spoke those words today. It seemed to me as if I perceived all at once a long silent song of home. I heard the wonderful voice of the exalted lady who spoke those words. It seemed to me as if I felt the kiss which she then imprinted on the head of the 5-year-old boy, felt it to my inmost heart, and it glowed there with the fire of an undying love, and shook my whole being, and filled my eyes with tears. You will not chide me for that, General, for those are the lips of my mother who pressed that kiss of blessing on her unhappy son. He ceased. Tears choked his utterance, and, as if ashamed of his deep emotion, he hid his face in his hands. General Kleber turned away too, and put his hand over his eyes as though a film had come over them. Then, after a long pause, he gently laid his hand upon the shoulder of the young man, who was still sitting with covered face. "Such memories are holy," he said, "and I honour them, my dear faithful son. May the blessing which then fell from the lips of a woman who I too knew and honoured, but whose name may never be spoken between us, may it be fulfilled to you. May angels and saints protect you when men shall no longer have the power, and when fate shall separate you from those who have devoted their love and fidelity to you." The youth let his hands fall from his face, and looked at the general with a startled, searching glance. "What do you mean, uncle?" "You do not mean to say that we must part?" "Yes, my dear nephew, that is what I must say," interrupted Kleber sadly. "This word has long been burning in my soul, and it's necessary that I speak it. Yes, we must part, Louis." "Why? Oh, why?" asked Louis bitterly. "Why will you too drive me away? You, the only one who loves me a little." "Exactly because I love you. Exactly for that reason must I separate myself from you. Since we came to Egypt you've been sickly. Your cheeks have become pale, the fullness of your limbs have gone, and the dry and hard cough that troubles you every morning has long made me anxious, as you know. On that account, after all the appliances of my physician failed, I applied, as you know, to the physician of the commanding general, to Corvisart, and he has subjected you to a thorough examination." "It is true," said Louis thoughtfully. "He has investigated me with the carefulness of a merchant who is about to buy a slave and means to test him. He made a hearing trumpet of his ear and laid it on my breast, and listened while I had to breathe as if I were a volcano. He put his ear to my heart. He told me that his father had been physician at the French court, and that the murdered queen had a great deal of confidence in him. And then he wondered that my heart beat so violently while he told me this." "And the result of all these investigations is that you must return to Europe, Louis," said Kleber sadly. "Corvisart had declared it an unavoidable necessity for your constitution, and the command of the physician must be obeyed as if it were the command of God. You cannot endure the climate of Egypt, so says Corvisart, and if your life is not to be shortened and you to be made a perpetual invalid, you must return to Europe as quickly as possible, for only there will you recover and grow strong. You see, therefore, Louis, that I must separate from you, although it is a sore thing for me to do, for I love you as my own son, and I have no one in the world who is nearly related to me." "And I? Whom else have I in the world?" asked Louis bitterly. "Who has interest in me excepting you? Ah, General, do not drive me from you. Believe me, it is better for me if, for a few short and happy years, I live at your side, and then breathe my last sigh in your faithful and tender arms, than if I have to wander solitary and friendless through the strange, cold world, where no one loves me, and where I shall always be surrounded by enemies, or by those who are indifferent. It may be that my body will gain health and strength in the air of Europe, but my heart will always be sick there, for it will lose its home when it shall have lost you, my fatherly friend." General Kleber slowly shook his head. "In youth one sorrows, and forgets it quickly." "General, do you say that to me, after seeing me weep in the hospital because the word of a dying man called back the recollection of my earliest childhood? Oh, believe me, my heart forgets its sorrows never, and if I must return to France, to Paris, it will seem to me as if I had always to be climbing the hill of Calvary with bloody feet to reach the top where I must perish on the cross. For believe me, General, my whole life will be nothing but such a wandering through scenes of pain if you drive me from the refuge that your love has offered me. Leave me here, let me live in secrecy and silence beneath the pinions of your love, and do not believe what the physicians tell you. Man's life lies in the hands of God, and if he will sustain it, it is as safe in the deserts of Egypt as in Paris, the capital of the world." "Because God will sustain your life, Louis, for that very reason, he instructs me through the voice of the physician what my duty is, bids me conquer my own grief, and send the son of my heart to his distant home. Now, Louis, it's a decided thing. We must part. You must return to France." "And if it is true," asked Louis bitterly, "if I am then really to return to France, why must we part? Why must I return without you? Why, if you really love me, do you not accompany me? I heard you say yesterday that several ships with a part of our troops were to return to France. Why then can you not go back with me?" "Why?" asked Kleber sadly. "I will tell you, Louis, because Bonaparte will not allow it. Listen, my son. I will communicate a secret to you. There has news come within the last few days, the first that we've received for 10 months. The newspapers which arrive bring very unwelcome intelligence. They inform us that all the advantages gained in Italy by the French army have been lost, that France is arrayed against Austria, Spain, and all the European powers, that the French government is threatened by internal factions which threaten to bring back the reign of terror. I watched Bonaparte's face as he read these papers, and I saw there what he was resolved to do. He will, as soon as he shall gain one more great victory, leave Egypt and return to France." "He will not return without you, the faithfulest and boldest of his generals. You know well that you are called the right-hand man of Bonaparte." "Bonaparte means to show the world that he is not only the head, but the right arm too, the heart, the foot, the soul of the French army, and because he means to show this, he will return alone to France. Only a few of his faithful subordinates will accompany him. The men who might even oppose him and put hindrances in the path of his growing ambition will remain here. Now, do you believe that Bonaparte will select me to accompany him?" The young man let his head fall slowly on his breast. "No," he said softly. "No, I do not believe he will." "And I know he'll not," replied Kleber. "I shall remain here in Egypt, and die here." "Hush! Do not contradict me. There are presentiments which do not mislead us, and which God sends to us that we may shape our course by them and set our house in order. My house is set in order. My will is made. I have given it to Bonaparte, and he has solemnly sworn to carry it into execution in all respects. Only one care is left me, to provide for your immediate future, and to arrange that you may reach France." "You adhere to this?" asked Louis sadly. "Yes, I abide by this. You must not run away from your own future, and this will, I trust, be a brilliant one. All tokens indicate that France is wearied with the Republic, and that it's perhaps nearly ready to restore the throne of the Lilies. Young man, Shall this re-established throne fall into the hands of that man who contributed so much to its downfall, who was the calumniator, the secret enemy of Queen Marie Antoinette? Would you consent that the Count de Provence should be King of France?" "No, never!" cried Louis, with blazing eyes and flaming face. "That never can be. For, before the brother of Louis XVI can ascend the throne as Louis XVIII, his rightful predecessor, Louis XVII, must have died." "He has died, and the French government has placed in its archives a certificate of the death of Louis Charles Capet, signed by the physicians and the servants of the temple. My son, in order to prevent the Count de Provence acknowledging this certificate as genuine, you must be prepared to place before him and the world other testimonials that Louis XVII is not dead. This is a sacred offering which you must make to the minds of the unfortunate Marie Antoinette, even if the stake were not a throne and a crown." "You are right," said Louis with enthusiasm. "My whole life shall be devoted to this sacred trust. It shall have no other aim than this, to avenge Marie Antoinette of the most cruel of her enemies, the Count de Provence, and to place the son whom, after the death of her husband, she acknowledged as King of France on the throne which really belongs to him, and not to the Count de Provence. You are right, General. I must return to Europe. I must carry to France the papers which show that Louis XVII did not die in the temple, but was released. I am ready to go, and to endure the pain of parting from you." "May God grant that we may both be compensated for this pain," replied Kleber, embracing the young man tenderly. "There remain for us a few weeks to be together. Let us use them so that they shall afford us many cheerful recollections. Bonaparte will not leave Egypt before adding one more glory to his reputation. He does not mean to return to France as the conquered, but as the conqueror." General Kleber was right. He knew Bonaparte sufficiently well to be able to read his countenance. He understood the dumb speech of the Caesar of the age. Bonaparte wanted to gain one great battle in order to return to Europe with glory. He gained it at Aboukir, winning the day in a contest with the United Turks and English, one of the most signal victories that he had ever won. 8,000 prisoners were taken on that 21st of July, 1799. 4,000 lay dead upon the battlefield, and as many were sunk in the captured and destroyed ships of the English. On the day after the battle, the foam of the waves was tipped with blood along the shore. Bonaparte himself conducted the whole battle and personally gained the victory. At the moment when the contest seemed doubtful, he assumed command of a cavalry regiment, advanced upon the Turkish Pasha, and by his heroic courage kindled all the army afresh. Even General Kleber could not disguise his admiration of the hero of Aboukir, and when, at the close of the battle, he met Bonaparte on the field, he embraced him with passionate tenderness. "General," he cried with enthusiasm, "you are as great as the world, but the world is not great enough for you." Footnote: Denon, Memoirs, Volume 1, page 349. End of Chapter 30, Part 1. Read by Julie Jackson, Staffordshire, 30th of June, 2021. Book 6, Chapter 30, Part 2 of Marie Antoinette and Her Son. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach, the Baronne de Richemont. The victory that Bonaparte desired was thus won, and he could return with honour to France. He made secret preparations for his journey thither, fitting up 2 ships which were to carry him and his companions. The army was to hear of his departure only after he had gone, but much as he desired to keep the thing secret, there were some who had to know of it, and among them, happily, was General Kleber. Bonaparte had chosen him as his successor, and therefore he must be informed respecting the condition of affairs before the head of the army should withdraw. On the same day when this communication took place, Kleber repaired to General Dusex, who was his intimate friend, and from whom he learned that he was to be one of Bonaparte's companions on the return. The two generals had a prolonged secret interview, and at the close of it they both went to Kleber's house and entered the room of his adjutant Louis. General Doucex bowed with great deference to the young man, who, blushing at the honour which so distinguished a general paid him, extended his hand to him. Doucex pressed a kiss upon it, and from his eyes, unused to tears, there fell a drop upon the young man's hand. "General," cried Louis in amazement, "what are you doing?" "I am paying my homage to misfortune and to the past," said Doucex solemnly, "and the tear which I drop on your hand is the seal of my fidelity and silence in the future. Young man, I swear to you that I will cherish your secret in my heart as a hallowed treasure, and will defend with my life's blood the papers which your uncle, General Kleber, has entrusted to me ere this day. I am a soldier of the Republic. I've pledged my fidelity to her, and must and shall keep it. I cannot become a partisan, but I shall always be the protector of misfortune and a helper in time of need. Trust me in this, and accept me as your friend." "I do accept you, General," said Louis gently, "and if I do not promise to love you just as tenderly as I love my uncle, General Kleber, who has been to me my father, brother, and protector, and to whom I owe everything, yet I can assure you that, after him, there is no one whom I will love as I shall you, and there is no one in Europe who can contend with you for my love. I am very poor in friends, and yet I feel that my heart is rich in love that no one desires now." "Preserve that possession well, me son," said Kleber as he took leave of his son and laid his hand on the head of the young man. "Preserve your heart tender and loving, for if fate is just, it may one day be for the advantage of a whole nation that you are so, and the heart of the man be the mediator between the people and its king. Farewell, my son. We see each other today for the last time, for in this very hour you will go to your ship with Doucex. It may be that the ships will sail this very night, and if so, well, a quick and unlooked-for separation mitigates the pains of parting. You'll soon have overcome them, and when you reach Paris, the past will sink behind you into the sea." "Never, oh never!" cried Louis with emotion. "I shall never forget my benefactor, my second father." "My son, one easily forgets in Paris, and especially when he goes thither for the purpose of creating a new future out of the ruins of the past. But I shall never forget you, and if my presentiment should not deceive me and I should soon die, you will learn after my death that I have loved you as a son. Now go, and I say to you as another loved voice once said to you, and as the sick and the dying once repeated it to you, God bless you, all saints and angels protect you." They remained locked in their tender embrace, and then parted, never to meet again. That very night, before the morning began to dawn, General Doucex started, accompanied by his adjutant Louis and a few servants. Their first goal was Alexandria, whither the command of General Bonaparte summoned them and a few others. The proposed journey of the commanding general was still a carefully concealed secret, and the divan in Cairo had merely been informed that Bonaparte was planning to undertake a short journey in the Delta. On the 22nd of August, 1799, an hour after midnight, 2 French frigates left the harbour of Alexandria. On board one of them was Bonaparte, the Emperor of the future. On the other was Louis Charles, the King of the past. Nameless and unknown, the descendant of the monarchs of France, with his 16 years, returned to France that seemed no longer to remember its past, its kings, and to have no thoughts, no love, no admiration for aught excepting the new, brilliant constellation which had arisen over France, Bonaparte. He had returned from Egypt to regain Italy, but he found other work awaiting him in Paris. This he brought to completion with the energy and boldness which characterized all his dealings. By a prompt stroke he put an end to the constitution which had prevailed till then, abrogated the Convention and the Council of 500, and gave the French Republic a new constitution, putting at the head of the government 3 consuls, Sieyès, Roger de Caus, and himself. But these 3 consuls were intended to be a mere transition, a mere step forward in the victorious march of Bonaparte. After a few weeks they were superseded, and Bonaparte became the first consul and the head of France. On the 25th of December 1799, France hailed General Bonaparte as the first consul of the French Republic. A new century was dawning, and with the beginning of this new century, the gates of the Tuileries, the deserted palace of kings, opened to a new possessor. Bonaparte, the first consul, took up his residence there, and in the first spring of the new century, the consul, accompanied by Josephine, removed to Saint-Cloud for summer quarters. The park of Queen Marie Antoinette was given by the French nation to the first consul, and in the apartments where the Queen, with her son Louis Charles and her daughter Teresa, once dwelt, Josephine, with her son Eugène and her daughter Hortense, now abode. "I would I had remained in Egypt," sighed the Dauphin often, when, in the silence and solitude of his apartment, he surrendered himself to his recollection and dreams. It had been better to die young in a foreign land, while all the stars of hope were beaming above me, than to protract a miserable, obscure life here, and see all the stars fade out one by one. Yes, the stars of hope were paling one by one for the son of King Louis. No one thought of him. No one believed in him. He had died in the temple. That was all that anyone wanted to know. The dead was lamented by all. The living would have been unwelcome to any. He had died and been buried, little King Louis XVII, and no one spoke of him more. The only subject of men's talk was the glory and greatness of the first consul. The beauty and grace of Josephine was celebrated in the same halls which had once resounded with the praises of fair Queen Marie Antoinette. The 500,000 lovers who had once bowed to Marie were now devoted to Josephine, and paid their homage to her with the same enthusiasm with which they had before worshipped the Queen. The son of the general who had once given the oath of fidelity to King Louis XVI, the son of General Beauharnais, is now the adopted son of the ruler of France, while the son of the king must secrete himself and remain without name, rank, and title. It is his good fortune that Doucex is there to pity the forsaken one, and to give him a place in his home and his heart. No one else knows him. He is the adjutant of General Doucex. That is his only rank and title. But he still remained the nephew of General Kleber, who had been left in Egypt, and who, at the end of the century, gained a decisive victory at Heliopolis over the Turks and Mamelukes. He remained the nephew of General Kleber, and at the end of the year 1800, the frigate L'Aiguille, on its return from Egypt, brought a great packet for General Doucex. It contained many papers of value, many rolls of gold pieces, besides gems and pearls, but it also contained a sealed black document directed to the adjutant of General Doucex. This document contained the will of Kleber, commander-in-chief of the French army in Egypt. He had given it to General Mernoux, together with his papers and valuables, with the intimation that directly after his death they should all be sent to General Doucex in France. General Mernoux followed this instruction, for Kleber was dead. The murderous bullet of a Mameluke killed him on the 14th of June, 1800. His will was the last evidence of his love for his nephew Louis, whom he designated as his only heir, and Kleber was rich through inherited wealth as well as the spoils of war. But Louis Charles took no satisfaction, and it made no impression on him when Doucex informed him that he was the possessor of 1,000,000. 1,000,000? What shall I do with it? Answered Louis sadly. Were it 1,000,000 soldiers, and I might put myself at their head, and with them storm the Tuileries and make my entrance into Saint-Cloud, I should consider myself fortunate. But what advantage to me are 1,000,000 francs? I can begin nothing with them. I should have to establish a store, and perhaps have the custom of the first consul of the Republic. Hush, young man, hush, replied Doucex. You are bitter and sad, and I understand that, for the horizon is dark for you, and offers you no cheerful prospect. But 1,000,000 francs is a good thing notwithstanding, and one day you'll know how to prize it. This 1,000,000 francs makes you a rich man, and a rich man is free and an independent man. You don't wish to live longer as a soldier. You have the power to give up your commission and live without care, and that's something. My next business will to be assure you your fortune against all the uncertainties of the future, which are the more to be guarded against, as we're soon to advance into Italy again for the next campaign. I can, therefore, not put your property and your papers into your hands, for they constitute your future, and we must deposit them with someone with whom they shall be safe, and that must be with a man of peace. Do you know who this man is? I know no one, General, excepting yourself, replied Louis with a shrug. Whom should I dare trust? But fortunately I know an entirely reliable man. Shall I tell you who he is? Do so, I beg you, General. His name is Fouche. Louis started, and deathly paleness covered his cheeks. Fouche? The chief of police? Fouche, the traitor who gave his voice in the convention for the death of King Louis? To him, the Red Republican, a man of blood and treachery, do you want to convey my papers and my property? Yes, Louis, for with him alone are they secure. Fouche will protect you and will stand by you with just as much zeal as he once displayed in the persecution of the royal family. I know him well, and I vouch for him. Men mustn't always be judged by their external appearance. He shows himself our enemy today, lends us tomorrow, it may be, a helpful arm, and becomes our friend, sometimes because his heart has been changed and sometimes because his character is feeble. I can't with certainty say which of these reasons has determined Fouche, but I'm firmly convinced that he will be a protector and a friend to you, and that in no hands will your property and your papers be safer than in his. Footnote: Doucet's own words. See Memoir de Duc de Normandie, page 61. Louis made no reply. He dropped his head with a sigh and submitted. On, in the new century, rolled the victorious car of Bonaparte down the Alps into the fertile plains of Italy. The conqueror of Lodi and Arculli meant to take revenge on the enemies who had snatched back the booty. Revenge on Austria, who had broken the peace of Campo Formio, and he did take this revenge at Marengo, where, on the 14th of June, he gained a brilliant victory over Austria and won all Italy as the prize of the battle. But the day was purchased at a sacrifice. General Doucet paid with his death for his impetuous onset. In the very thick of the fight, mortally wounded by a ball, he fell into the arms of his adjutant Louis, and only with extreme peril could the latter, himself wounded, bear the general away from the melee and not be trampled to death by the horses of his own soldiers. Poor Louis Charles! He now stood entirely alone. The last friend had left him. Death had taken away everything: parents, crown, home, name, friends. He was alone, all alone in the world. No man to take any interest in him, no one to know who he was. Sunk in sadness, he remained in Alessandria after the Battle of Marengo, and allowed this external wound to heal, while the internal one continued to bleed. He cursed death, because it had not taken him while removing his last friend. And when the wound was healed, what should he do? Under what name and title should he be enrolled in the army? His only protector was dead, and the adjutant was reported to have died with him. He put off the uniform which he had worn as the soldier of the Republic, which had destroyed his throne and his inheritance, and, in simple, unpretending garments, he returned to Paris, an unknown young man. Doucet was right. It was indeed something to possess 1,000,000 francs. Poor as he was in love and happiness, this 1,000,000 francs made him at least a free and independent man, and therefore he would demand his inheritance of him whom he formerly shunned, because he was one of the murderers of his father. Fouche received the young man exactly as Doucet had expected. He showed himself in the light of a sympathizing protector. He was touched with the view of this youth, whose countenance was the evidence of his lineage, the living picture of the unfortunate Louis XVI, whom Fouche had brought to the scaffold. Perhaps this man of blood and the guillotine had compunctions of conscience. Perhaps he wanted to atone to the son for his injuries to the parents. Perhaps he was planning to make the son of the Bourbon a check to the ambitious consul of the Republic. Perhaps to humiliate the grasping Count de Lille, who was intriguing at all the European courts for the purpose of raising armies against the French Republic. The son of Louis XVI could be employed as a useful foil to all these political manoeuvres, and subsequently he could either be publicly acknowledged or denounced as an impostor, as circumstances might determine. At present, it suited the plans of the crafty Fouche to acknowledge him and to assume the attitude of a protector. He put on a very respectful and sympathetic air to the poor solitary youth. With gentle, tremulous voice he called him Your Majesty. He begged his pardon for the past. He spoke with such deep emotion and so solemn a tone of the good, great and gentle Louis XVI that the heart of the son was powerfully touched. And when Fouche, with flaming words of enthusiasm, began to speak of the noble unhappy Queen Marie Antoinette, when with glowing eloquence he celebrated her beauty and her gentleness in time of good fortune, her greatness and steadfastness in ill fortune, all the anger of the young man melted in the tears of love which he poured out as he remembered his mother. "I forgive you, Fouche. Yes, I forgive you," he cried, extending both his hands. "I see plainly the power of political faction hurried you away, but your heart cannot be bad, for you love my noble mother. I forgive you, and I trust you." Fouche, deeply moved, sank upon his knee before the Dauphin and called himself one of his loyal subjects, and promised to take all means to restore the young king to the throne of his fathers. He conjured Louis to trust him, and to enter upon no plan without asking his counsel. Louis promised this. He told Fouche that he was the only man who had talked with him about the past without using ambiguous language, that he was surprised at this, and compelled to recognize as true what formerly had been fettered on his tongue. He told him that he had promised his rescuer with a solemn oath never to acknowledge himself as the son of Louis XVI and King of France, till this rescuer and benefactor empowered him to do so, and released him from his vow of silence. He made it, therefore, the first condition of his confidence that Fouche should disclose his secret to no one, but carry it faithfully in his own breast. Fouche promised all, and took a sacred oath that he would never reveal the secret confided to him by the King of France. But he confessed at the same time that the first consul knew very well that the son of the king had been released from the temple, and that among the posthumous papers of Kleber there was a letter directed to Bonaparte, stating that he, Kleber, knew very well that the little Capet was still living, and imploring Bonaparte to restore the orphan to the throne of the Lilies. The consul had, therefore, quietly made investigations, and learned that Louis had taken part as the adjutant of General Dussex in the Battle of Marengo, that he had been wounded there, and remained in the hospital of Alessandria till his recovery. Since then, all trace of the young man had been lost, and he had commissioned Fouche to discover the adjutant of Kleber and Dussex and bring him to him. "You will not do that," cried Louis eagerly. "You will not disclose me." "Are you afraid of him?" asked Fouche with a suspicious smile. The young man blushed, and a cloud passed over his clear forehead. "Fear?" he replied with a shrug. "The sons of my ancestors have no fear, and I have shown on the battlefields of Aboukir and Marengo, and in the pest houses of Jaffa, that I know not the word. But when one meets a bloodthirsty lion in his path, he turns out of the way, and when a tiger extends its talons at one, he flies. That is the duty of self-preservation, and not the flight of a coward." "Do you believe, then, that this lion thirsts for royal blood?" "I believe that he thirsts for royal rank, and that he will neglect no means to vanquish all hindrances that might intervene between himself and the throne. Do you believe, sir, that the man who, after the battle of Aboukir, sentenced 5,000 prisoners to death, would hesitate a moment to take the life of a poor defenceless young man such as I am? He would beat me into the dust as the lion does the flea which dares to play with his mane." "It appears you know this Ion very well," said Fouche with a smile, "and I really believe you judge him rightly. But be without concern, he shall not know from me that I am aware of you and your abiding place. In order that Bonaparte shall not take me to be a bad detective, I shall show him in all other things that I am on the alert. In case of necessity, it may be that I shall have to resort to deception, and in order to save your life, inform the consul that you are dead. There are a great many young officers who fell at Marengo, or afterward died as a result of their wounds. Why should not the adjutant of General Dusex have met his fate? Yes, I believe this will be the best. I will give you out as dead in order to save your life. I will cause a paper to be prepared which shall testify that the adjutant of General Dusex, who lay there in the hospital, died there of his wounds and was buried. And so I shall disappear from life a second time? Asked Louis sadly. Yes, sire, in order to enter anew upon it with greater splendour, replied Fouche eagerly. Who knows whether this shall ever be, sighed Louis. How shall I be able to establish my identity if I die and am buried twice? Who will be my pledge that I shall be able to convince men that I am not a deceiver, and that my whole existence is not an idle tale? There are only a few who know and believe that little Capet escaped from the temple and went to Egypt as Kleber's adjutant. If now these few learn that the adjutant fell in battle, if the paper that testifies to his death is laid before them, how shall I subsequently be believed if I announce that I am alive and that I am the one for whom I give myself out? The seal of royalty is impressed on no man's brow, and we know from history that there have been false pretenders. You shall show with your papers that you are not such, said Fouche eagerly, and God will grant that I too shall be living when the time shall be in which you may come forward with raised voice and demand your inheritance and your throne. Hope for that time, and meanwhile preserve your papers well. Carry them always with you. Part with them neither day nor night, for in these papers rest your future and your crown. No other man besides yourself can take care of them. These papers are worth more to you than 1,000,000 francs, although even that should not be scorned. Here are the documents that give you possession of your wealth. I have deposited your funds in the Bank of France, and you can throw out money at any time by presenting these checks that I give you, simply writing your name upon them. By simply writing my name upon them, cried Louis bitterly. But, sir, what is my name? How shall I be called? I was formerly designated as the nephew of Kleber, Colonel Louis, the adjutant of Dusex. But Colonel Louis can no longer acknowledge that he is alive, and you propose to convince the first consul that the nephew of Kleber is dead. Who then am I? What name shall I subscribe to those papers? By what name shall the nameless, the dead and buried, the resurrected, the again dead and buried one, by what name shall he draw money from the bank? Very true, said Fouche. A name, or rather the mask of a citizen's or nobleman's name, must be your disguise, and it is imperatively necessary that we give you such, and provide you with papers that cannot be forged, which shall prove your existence and secure you against every assault. Very good. Then tell me how I shall be called, said Louis sadly. Be the godfather of the solitary and nameless. Well, I will, cried Fouche. In the glamour of political passions, I have raised my voice against the life of your father. Full of regret, I will raise my voice for the life of the son, and assist him to enter afresh upon life and into the society of men. Young man, I will give you a name and rank. Till the French nation restore to you your true name and rank, you shall henceforth be called the Baron de Richemont. Will you accept it? Yes, I will accept it, said Louis gently. To be the Baron de Richemont is better than to be a dead and buried person without any name. Very good, my Lord Baron, cried Fouche. I will have the necessary certificates and papers made out, and enter your property in the Bank of France under the name of the Baron de Richemont. If you please come tomorrow to me, and I will deliver you the papers of the Monsieur de Richemont. I shall come, be sure of that, said Louis, giving him his hand. It seems to me my fate to go incognito through life, and God alone knows whether I shall ever abandon this incognito. He saluted Fouche with a sad smile and went out. The minister listened to the resounding footstep, and then broke out into loud, mocking laughter. Foolish boy, he said, raising his hand threateningly. Foolish boy! You suppose that only God knows whether you will ever come out of your incognito. You mistake. Besides God, Fouche knows it. Yes, Fouche knows that this incognito extends over you like a net from which you will never escape. No, the Baron de Richemont shall never be transformed into King Louis XVII. But he shall be an instrument with which I will hold in check this ambitious Consul Bonaparte who is striving for the throne, and this grasping Count de Lisle, who, in his exile, calls himself King Louis XVIII, the instrument with which I threaten when I am threatened. Only, my little Baron de Richemont, I do not know what I can make out of you, but I know that you shall make out of me a rich, dangerous, and dreaded man. poor credulous fool, how easily you fall into the pit. The Baron de Richemont shall never escape from it. I vouch for it. I, Fouche. End of chapter 30, part 2. Read by Julie Jackson, Staffordshire, 30th of June, 2021. Book 6, Chapter 31, Part 1 of Marie Antoinette and Her Son. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach. Fouche. The First Consul was walking with hasty steps up and down his cabinet. His eyes flashed, and his face, which elsewhere was impenetrable, like that of the brazen statues of the Roman emperors, disclosed the fiery impatience and stormy passions which raged within him. His lips, which were pressed closely together, opened now and then to mutter a word of threat or of anger, and that word he hurled like a poisoned arrow directly at the man who, in a respectful attitude and with pallid cheeks, stood not far from the door, near the table covered with papers. This man was Fouche, formerly the chief of police in Paris and now a mere member of the Senate of the Republic. He had gone to the Tuileries in order to request a secret audience of Bonaparte, who had now forgotten the little prefix of first to his consular title and now reigned supreme and alone over France. Bonaparte suddenly paused in his rapid walk, coming to a halt directly in front of Fouche, and looked at him with flaming eyes as if there were two daggers with which he meant to pierce deep into his heart. But Fouche did not see this, for he stood with downcast eyes and appeared not to be aware that Bonaparte was so near him. "Fouche!" cried the consul violently. "I know you, and I am not to be deceived by your indifferent, affected air. You shall know that I do not fear you, you and all the ghosts that you can conjure up. You think that you frighten me. You wish that I should pay you dearly for your secret. But you shall know that I am not at all of a timorous nature, and that I shall pay no money for the solution of a riddle which I may perhaps be able to solve without your help. I warn you, sir, you secret vendor, be well on your guard. You have your spies, but I have my police, and they inform me about everything out of the usual course. It is known, sir, that you are carrying on a correspondence with people out of the country. Understand me, with people out of the country." "Consul," replied Fouche calmly, "I have certainly not known that the Republic forbids its faithful servants to send letters abroad." "The Republic will never allow one of its servants to correspond with its enemies," cried Bonaparte in thundering tones. "Be silent, sir. No evasions, no circumlocutions. Let us speak plainly and to the point. You are in correspondence with the Count de Lille." "You know that, Consul, for I have had the honour to give you a letter myself, which the Pretender directed to you, and sent to me to be delivered." "A ridiculous, nonsensical letter," replied Bonaparte with a shrug. "A letter in which this fool demands of me to bring him back to France, and to indicate the place which I wish to occupy in his government. By my word, an idiot would not write a more crazy document. I am to indicate the place which I wish to occupy in his government. Well, I shall do that, but there will be no place left near me for the Bourbons, whom France has spewed out as one spews out mortal poison. These hated and weak Bourbons shall never attain to power and prestige again. France has turned away from them. France abhors this degenerate race of kings. It will erect a new edifice of power and glory, but there will be no room in it for the Bourbons. Mark that, intriguer, and build no air castles on it. I demand of you an open confession, for I shall accuse you as a traitor and a royalist." "Consul, I shall not avoid this charge," replied Fouche calmly, "and I am persuaded that France will follow with interest the course of a trial which will unveil an important secret." which will inform it that the rightful King of France, according to the opinion of Consul Bonaparte, did not die in the temple under the tender care of Simon the Cobbler, but is still alive, and is therefore the true heir of the crown. That would occasion some joy to the royalists, surely. The consul stamped on the floor with rage. His eyes shot flames, and when he spoke again, his voice rang like peals of thunder, so angrily and so powerfully did it pour forth. I will change the peons and the joy of these royalists to lamentations and wailings, he cried. All the enemies of France shall know that I hold the sword in my hands and mean to use it, not only against foes without, but foes within. France has given me this sword, and I shall not lay it down, even if all the kings of Europe and all the Bourbons who lie in the vaults of Saint-Denis leave their graves to demand it from me. I am the living sword of France, and never shall this sword bow before the sceptre of a Bourbon. Fresh shoots might sooner spring from the dead stick which the wanderer carries through the desert than a Bourbon sceptre could grow from the sword of Bonaparte. And all the same, whether this Bourbon calls himself Louis XVII or Louis XVIII, mark that, Fouche, and mark also that when I once say I will, I shall know how to make my will good, even if the whole world ventures to confront me. I know that, Consul, said Fouche with deference. God gave you, for the will of France, an iron will and a brain of fire, and destined you to wear not only laurels, but crowns. A flame glared from the eyes of the consul and played over the face of Fouche, but the latter appeared not to notice it, for he cast down his eyes again, and his manner was easy and unconstrained. You now speak a word which is not becoming, said Bonaparte calmly. I am the first servant of the Republic, and in a republic there are no crowns. Not citizens' crowns, General, asked Fouche with a faint smile. I mean that this noblest of crowns can everywhere be acceptable, and no head has merited such a crown more than the noble Consul Bonaparte, who has made the Republic of France a worthy rival of its sister in North America. Bonaparte threw his head back proudly. I am not ambitious of the honour, he said, of being Washington of France. Yet you are he, General, replied Fouche with a smile. Only the Washington of France does not live in the White House which a republic has built, but in the Tuileries which he has received as the heir of the French kings. General, as the worthiest, as the greatest, the most powerful, and the most signally called, you have come into the possession of the inheritance of the kings of France, for to this inheritance belongs also the crown of France. Why do you refuse this while accepting all the rest? And what if I show you that I do not want it? Asked Bonaparte. And what if I should tell you that I do not feel myself worthy to assume the whole, undivided inheritance of the Bourbons? Would you be foolish and senseless enough to believe such an idle tale? Consul, you have already done so many things that are wonderful, and have brought so many magic charms to reality, that I no longer hold anything to be impossible, as soon as you have laid your hand upon it. And therefore you hold a concealed magician's wand, which you propose to draw forth at some decisive moment, and present to me, as the cross is presented to Beelzebub in the tale. I do not understand you, Consul, replied Fouche with the most innocent air in the world. Well, then, I will make myself intelligible. The magician's wand which you are keeping concealed is called Louis XVII. Oh, do not shake your cunning head. Do not deny with your smooth lips which once uttered the death sentence of Louis XVI, and which now are used to teach a fool and a pretender that he is the son of the murdered king. Truly it is ridiculous. The regicide wants to atone for his offence by hatching a fable and making a king out of a mannequin. General, no fable and no mannequin, cried Fouche with a threatening voice. The son of the unfortunate king is alive, and— interrupted Bonaparte triumphantly. So you confess at last. You reveal your great secret at length. I have driven the sly fox out of his hole, and the hunt can now begin. It will be a hot chase, I promise you, and I shall not rest till I have drawn the skin over the ears of the fox, or until he says his pétard pécarvi, asked Fouche with a gentle smile. "Until he delivers to me the changeling whom he wants to use as his deus ex machina," replied Bonaparte. "My dear sir, it helps you not at all to begin again this system of lies. Your anger has betrayed you, and I have succeeded in outwitting the fox. The so-called son of the king is alive, that has escaped you, and you cannot take it back." "No, it cannot be taken back," replied Fouche with a sigh. "I have disclosed myself, or rather I have been outwitted. You are in all things a hero and a master, cunning as much as in bravery and discretion. I bow before you as before a genius whom God himself has sent upon the earth to bring the chaotic world into order again. I bow before you as before my lord and master, and instead of opposing you, I will henceforth be content with being your instrument, provided that you will accept me as such." "That is, Fouche, provided that I will fulfill your conditions," cried Bonaparte with a shrug. "Very well. Name your conditions. Without circumlocution. What do you demand?" "Consul, in order that we may understand one another, we must both be open and unreserved. Will you permit me to be free with you?" "Certainly," replied Bonaparte with a condescending nod. "Consul, you have thrust me aside. You have no longer confidence in me. You have taken from me the post of Minister of Police and given it to my enemy, Régnier. That has given me pain. It has injured me, for it has branded me before all the world as a useless man whom Bonaparte suspects. Your enemies have believed that my alienation from you could conduce to their advantage, and that out of the dismissed police prefect they might gain an enemy to Bonaparte. Conspirators of all kinds have come to me, emissaries of Count Lille, deputies from the Royalists in Vendée, as well as from the Red Republicans, by whom you, Bonaparte, are as much hated as by the Royalists, for they will never forgive you for putting yourself at the head of the Republic and making yourself their master. All of these parties have made propositions to me. All of them want me to join them. I have lent my ear to them all. I have been informed of all their plans, and am, at this hour, the sworn ally of both Republicans and Royalists. Oh, I beg you," continued Fouche as Bonaparte started up and opened his lips to speak, "I beg you, General, hear me to the end and do not interrupt me till I have told you all. Yes, I have allied myself to 3 separate conspiracies, and have become zealous in them all. There is first that of the Republicans, who hate you as a tyrant of the Republic. There is, in the second place, the conspiracy of the Royalists, who want to put the Count de Lille on the throne. And third, there is that of the genuine Capetists, who want to make the orphan of the Temple Louis XVII. These 3 conspiracies have it as their first object to remove and destroy Consul Bonaparte. Yes, to reach this end, the 3 have united and made a mutual compromise. Whichever party succeeds in murdering you is to come into power, and the others are to relinquish the field to it. And so, if Bonaparte is killed by a Republican dagger, the Republic is to remain at present the recognized form of government. And if the bull of a Royalist removes you, the Republicans strike their banner and grant that France shall determine by a general ballot whether it shall be a republic or a kingdom." "Well?" asked Bonaparte calmly, as Fouche closed and cast an inquiring glance at the consul's face, which was, notwithstanding, entirely cold and impenetrable. "Well? Why do you stop? I did not interrupt you with a question. Go on." "I will, Consul. I have made myself a member of these 3 conspiracies, for, in order to contend with the heads of Cerberus, one must have them all joined, and in order to be the conqueror in a great affair, one must know who all his enemies are, and what all their plans. I know all the plans of the Allies, and because I know them, it is within my power to bring discontent and enmity among them, using this and the 3rd conspiracy, that of the dependents of Louis XVII, the orphan of the Temple. Through sympathy with him, I have divided the party of Royalists. I have withdrawn from the Count de Lille many of his important dependents, and even some of the chief conspirators who came to Paris to contend for Louis XVIII have recently in secret bent the knee to Louis XVII and sworn fidelity to him." "This is not true," cried Bonaparte vehemently. "You are telling me nursery stories, with which children may be frightened, but men not. There are no secret meetings in Paris." "General, if your Minister of Police, Regnier, has told you so, he only shows that he is no man to be at the head of the police, and knows nothing of the detective service. I tell you, General, there are secret societies in Paris, and I ought to know, for I am a member of 4 separate ones." "Ha! Sir," sneered Bonaparte, "you are out of your head. Before you spoke of 3 conspiracies, and now they have grown to be 4. "I am speaking now of secret societies, Consul, for not every secret society can be called a conspiracy. Before, when I was giving account of conspiracies, I mentioned 3. Now, when we speak of secret societies, I have to mention a 4th. But this does not deserve the name of a conspiracy, for its object is not murder and revolution, nor does it arm itself with daggers and pistols." "I should be curious to know the name of your 4th society," cried Bonaparte impatiently. "I will satisfy your curiosity, General. This 4th secret society bears the name the Bonapartists, or, allow me to approach you closer that the walls of the old palace may not hear a word, or the Imperialists." Bonaparte shrank back, and a glow of red passed for a moment over his cheeks. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean by that, General, what I have already said. Your brow is made not to wear laurels alone, but a crown, and there is only one way to destroy the other 3 conspiracies, the way proposed by the 4th secret society. In order to make the efforts of the Republicans and Royalists ineffective, and to tread them under your feet, France needs an emperor." "Do you want to make your mannequin Louis XVII, Emperor of France?" "No, General," answered Fouche solemnly. "No. I want to make Consul Bonaparte Emperor of the French." The consul trembled, and his eyes flashed through the apartment, the former cabinet of Louis XVI, as if he wanted to convince himself that no one had heard this dangerous word of the future. Then he slowly bent forward without meeting Fouche's looks, which were intently fixed upon him. A pause ensued, a long, anxious pause. Then Bonaparte slowly raised his eyes again, and now it was filled as with sunlight. "Is your 4th secret society numerous?" he asked with that magical smile which won all hearts. "It comprises artists, poets, scholars, and, above everything else, officers and generals," replied Fouche. "It grows more numerous every day, and as fortunately I have only been deposed from my place of Minister of Police, but still remain a member of the Senate of the Republic, it has been my effort to gain over, in the Senate, influential members for my secret society of imperialists. If my hopes are crowned with success, the secret society will soon become an open one, and the Senate will apply to you with a public request to put an end to all these conspiracies and intrigues, to place yourself at the head of France and accept the imperial crown which the Senate offers you." "But I comprehend your but, Fouche," interrupted Bonaparte eagerly. "You want to make your conditions. An imperial crown does not fall direct from heaven upon the head of a man. There must be hands there to take it, and it might happen that they would be crushed by the falling crown. They must be paid for their heroism, therefore. Let us suppose, then, that I give you credence to all your stories, even that about the empire of the future. Tell me now what you demand." "General, if I show you and all France by facts that the country is rent by conspiracies, that the cancer of secret societies is eating into the very marrow of the land and imperiling all its institutions, will you confess to me then that I am better adapted to be the head of the police than Monsieur Regnier d'Angely, who insists and dares to say to you that there are no secret societies in France?" Prove to me by facts the existence of your conspiracies, and I will commission you to help me destroy this Hydra's head. Give me the proofs, and you shall be head of police again." Fouche bowed. "You shall have the proofs, General, today, at once, provided that we thoroughly understand each other. I am ambitious, General, and I have no wish to be driven back for a single day into nothingness, as I should be if my enemies withdraw their confidence in me. Now I am at least a member of the Senate, but if the Senate is dissolved and I should subsequently be deposed again from the head of the police, I should be nothing but Fouche. Fouche fallen out of favour. Voilà tout." "No, not so," said Bonaparte with a smile. "You will always be known as the murderer of the king. That is a fine title for a republican, is it not?" "Ah, General, I see that you understand me," cried Fouche. "We are now talking about a name, a position, a title for me. Provided that here in the Tuileries our throne is re-established, we must have a court again, men with orders, titles, and dignities." "It is true," said Bonaparte thoughtfully. "The world continues to revolve in the same circles of folly and vanity, and after making an effort to withdraw from them, it falls back again into the old ruts. Men are nothing but actors, and everyone wants to adorn himself with glistening rags in order to take the first part and have his name go upon the poster of history. Well, how would you be called, Fouche, if the drama of an empire should really be brought forward upon the great stage of the world?" "I would like the title of a prince or duke, sire." Bonaparte could scarcely suppress the smile of satisfaction that played over his face. It was the first time that he had ever been addressed as king or emperor, and this sire, which Fouche dropped into the ear of Bonaparte like a sweet poison, flattered his senses and soothed him like delightful music. But the strength of his genius soon resumed its sway, and he broke out into a loud, merry laugh. "Confess, Fouche," he cried, "that it is comical to hear the consul talking with a senator of the Republic about an empire and ducal titles. Truly, if the strict republicans of your conspiracy number 1 should hear this, they would be justified in accusing us as traitors and conspirators. We must get the start of them. We must accuse them. If we possess secure means to do so, I possess them, and I will give them to you, Consul Bonaparte, as soon as the Emperor of the future assures me of a princely title, in addition to the chieftaincy of police." "Very well," said Bonaparte, laughing. "The Emperor of the future promises you that as soon as he is able to bake a batch of these delicacies, he will put his chief of police in the oven and roar him out as a prince or a duke. The Emperor of the future gives you his word of honour that he will do it. Are you satisfied now, my Lord Republican?" "Sire, completely satisfied," said Fouche, bowing low. "And now let us talk together seriously," said Bonaparte. "You have spoken of conspiracies. You assert that they exist, but do not forget that you have promised me tangible proofs. Understand me well, tangible proofs. That is, it is not enough for me to see the papers and the lists of conspirators who have escaped into foreign lands. I want persons, men of flesh and blood, traitors whom I may hang, not in effigy, but in reality, and who may serve as a warning example to the whole herd of conspirators and put an end forever to this nonsense. I am wearied of being perpetually threatened by traitors, poisoned daggers, air guns, plots and intrigues of all kinds. It is time to hunt down the chief men of these bravos who have been sent here from England, Germany, Russia and Italy, and I have had enough of illustrating the old proverb, hang the little thief and let the great one run. I mean to have the great thief and to hang him, for that is the only way of intimidating these fellows and inspiring them with respect." "Sire, you shall have your great thieves," said Fouche with a smile. "Give them into my hands, and I promise you they shall never escape," cried Bonaparte eagerly. "It is high time to make an example, and show these people at last that I claim the right of paying back. The Count de Lille and the Duc d'Enghien are always egging their conspirators upon me. They appear to have no other aim than to get rid of me, and are unwearied with their daggers, infernal machines, and counterplots. But their own persons and those of their highest helpers always remain beyond reach. they arrange their plans always at a safe distance, and risk nothing by this. For if we take some of their subordinate tools and punish them, they make an outcry about barbarity and cruelty, and appeal to their sacred right of using all means to regain their inheritance and re-establish the throne in France. They do not deny that they would have no conscientious scruples about shedding my blood. Now, why should I have any about shedding theirs? Blood for blood, that is the natural and unavoidable law of retaliation, and woe to him who lays claim to it. These Bourbons do so. I have never injured one of them personally. A great nation has placed me at its head. My blood is worth as much as theirs, and it is time at last that I make it à pareil with theirs. I will no longer serve as a target for all murderers, and then afterward only find the dagger, instead of seizing the hands that ply it. Let me once have hold of the hands, and all the daggers will disappear forever. I will give these hands into your power, or at least some fingers of them. I want them all, cried Bonaparte eagerly. All the fingers, all the hands. You have spoken of 3 different conspiracies. I want the leaders of them, and then all others may run. If the Hydra loses its 3 heads, it must at last die. So give me the 3 heads, that of the Republicans and of the 2 Royalist parties. The head of conspiracy number 2, I know, it is the Count de Lille. He's the sly spider who always withdraws behind his nets. But I know the hand too. That is set in motion by this head. It is the Duc d'Enghien. He is an untiring conspirator, wholly occupied with infernal machines and daggers for me. Ha! Let him take care of himself, this little Duc d'Enghien. If I take him, I will exercise the right of retaliation upon him, for I am determined to have peace. We now come to your conspiracy number 3, to your Deus ex machina, the so-called Louis XVII. This Deus really exists? Yes, General, he exists. End of chapter 31, part 1, read by Julie Jackson, Staffordshire, 6th of July, 2021. Book 6, Chapter 31, Part 2 of Marie Antoinette and Her Son. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach. Fouche. Bonaparte laughed aloud, but his laughter sounded like a threat. I have heard of this story, he said. The good-natured Kleber believed it, and after his death a paper was given to me, written by him and directed to me, which stated that his so-called nephew Louis was the heir of the King of France, and implored me earnestly to take the orphan of the Temple under my protection. I instituted inquiries for him at once. It was after the Battle of Marengo, and this Monsieur Louis was, till then, adjutant of General Dussex. Yes, General Adjutant of Dussex, down to the Battle of Marengo, that is, to the death of Dussex. If I mistake not, his adjutant was wounded in the battle and lay at the hospital in Alessandria. It is so, General. I wonder how closely you have been informed respecting the fortunes of the young man. From that time all trace of him has been lost, and all my inquiries have proved in vain. The adjutant of Dussex, who fought so bravely and who bore my dying comrade in his arms, deserved advancement, and I wanted to give it to him, and therefore searched for him, but in vain. I believed him dead, and now you come and tell me about a conspiracy in favour of Louis XVII. This young pretender is still alive, then, and there are childlike souls who believe his story, are there? General, he says little, for he is very silent and reticent, but he has testimonials which speak for him, and which show that his story is not an idle tale, but a fragment of history. His papers give clear and undeniable evidence of his lineage and the course of his life. I should like to see these papers once, said the consul. He never let them go out of his hands, for he knows very well that they are his security for a crown. Then bring me the man himself, and then I shall have him and his papers, said Bonaparte with a growl like a lion's. Is not he the head of the conspiracy? Yes, General, the head of a conspiracy which I have conducted because I meant to have all the threads in my hands if I was to see clearly. In order to prove the royalists, I threw them this bait, and many of them have taken the hook and come over to the young king. In this way, I have made a division in the ranks of the royalists, and the Count de Lille already sees the consequences. The so-called orphan of the temple has at this hour no enemy who hates him more than the Count de Lille. But this enmity of the Count de Lille vanishes like a glowworm in the darkness. I want tangible proofs by which I can arrest my enemies. Can you give them to me? General, it will not be difficult to do this. We will speak of it hereafter. Allow me first a word about this dangerous adjutant of Doucex, Colonel Louis. You said, General, that you made futile efforts to gain information about this interesting and brave young man. Those efforts were made in the years when Monsieur René d'Angely was chief of police, in which my enemies succeeded in withdrawing the confidence of the first consul from me. But had I been chief of police at that time, I should have been able to tell you that the young man whom you were seeking, and respecting whom you obtained no information, was living here in Paris. What? Cried Bonaparte in amazement. This so-called Louis XVII in Paris, then? General, he is still here. He has been living in Paris for about 4 years, about as long as Monsieur Regnier has been head of police. And the Regnier has told me nothing about it. Has he not known that so dangerous a person was living in Paris? Fouche shrugged his shoulders. Monsieur Regnier, who doubts the existence of secret societies in France and tells you that the assassins who have so often of late imperiled your life have all been sent hither from foreign parts by the pretenders to the crown, and that there are no conspirators in France. Monsieur Regnier could not, of course, know the head of this secret society. He left them to follow their own pleasures unhindered here in Paris. But I know them, and I give you my word of honor, General, that the so-called nephew of Gliba is living here in Paris. Directly after his arrival, he came to me, and I handed to him the papers and documents which Doucex entrusted to me, and which I had solemnly sworn to deliver to his adjutant Louis. The young man gave me his confidence, and when I spoke to him regretfully and with enthusiasm about his father and his mother, and addressed him as His Majesty, I won his love. He opened his heart to me, confessed that he was Louis XVII, and asked my counsel and help. I promised him both, and showed myself to him in a very compliant and devoted mood. My first counsel was that he should live incognito under a borrowed name. In order that this might be possible, I gave him the name for his incognito, and had all the necessary documents prepared: the certificate of his birth, baptism, the marriage of his parents, and the will of his relatives. And all of these documents were false and forged? Said Bonaparte in amazement. There are everywhere pliable public officials in France, replied Fouche with a smile. I did not content myself with procuring for my protégé the papers which ensured him an honourable name, respectable family position, and a life without care. I did much more for him. I followed the efforts already related with others. I had a certificate of the death of Monsieur Louis prepared so as to give him a passport out of life. In order to protect himself from every injury, I told him that he, as the adjutant of Doucex, must pass as dead. He approved of it, and I took the pains to procure from the hospital at Alexandria a duly signed and sealed certificate that Colonel Louis, the adjutant of General Doucex, died of his wounds there. Good God! Cried Bonaparte. Is everything in life to be bought and sold thus? Yes, General, everything, loyalty and love, life and death. I have caused the son of the King of France to die and then rise again, and all with gold. But when the certificate arrived, a change had occurred in my relations. I had been removed from office, and Regnier was my successor. I kept the certificate in my possession, but in order to secure my protégé against what might befall me in case of my death, I wrote to him that I had received the papers and that he would live without danger in Paris under his assumed name. This letter I signed with my whole name and set my seal to it, that in case of need it might be of service to him. Fouche, you are a sly fox, said Bonaparte with a laugh. 'Tis easier to get out of the way of a cannonball than out of your snares. One might say to you, in the words of the King of Prussia, God defend me from my friends, from my enemies I can defend myself. According to this, you have caused Colonel Louis to die for friendship's sake and rise again under another name. Yes, General, that is it. Colonel Louis, that is the rightful King Louis XVII, is a tool in my hands, which I hold as a check to all parties, and which I can hold up or withdraw according as it pleases me. At present, my game is not merely to bring disunion and hatred into the ranks of the Royalists, but to bring over many Republicans who have a soft heart, to be zealous partisans of the young and unfortunate King. And afterward, said Bonaparte with a sterner tone, you might make use of this instrument to intimidate that fourth party of which you spoke before, the Bonapartists. But you have been mistaken, Fouche. This reckoning does not do. Your cunning has overreached itself. You do not terrify me, and if it could really happen that the French nation should offer me an imperial crown, at the same time that I should accept it, I should put my foot on the neck of all rebels and pretenders. With a single tread I would crush them all. I want no parties, no political factions. I want to bring all these risings and agitations to silence. There shall be no secret societies in France, and against each and every conspirator, whatever his rank may be, I will bring from this time forth the whole weight of the law. Mark this, Fouche. I mean to make an end of all parties, and only when you shall give their chiefs into my hand, not for my personal vengeance, for I cherish no vengeance against those cowardly worms of conspirators, but for the righteous punishment and retaliatory laws of France. Only when you are able, by one grand coup and one well-founded charge, to destroy all conspiracies and bring all secret coalitions to the light, only then shall you become chief of police. Only then will the future emperor give you the title of duke. General, I will build on your word, and I am sure of becoming chief of police and duke. You will put an end to all conspiracies. And to the Monsieur Louis too, said Bonaparte eagerly. It is a disagreeable and troublesome figure. So long as he lives, he would live in the ermine of the imperial cloak, like a troublesome insect which always stings and pricks. One must not allow such insects to find their way into his fur, and this Monsieur Louis must be put out of the way once for all. I hope he has entered deeply enough into the conspiracy not to come out of it again with a whole skin. General, I have told you already that the day before yesterday his dependents saluted him in a secret gathering as their king. It is true indeed that the poor little fellow strongly opposed it and obstinately refused to accept all honours, but the fact remains unchanged. And on the ground of this fact shall he be apprehended, cried Bonaparte with a threatening voice. There must be an example made, and this Louis is a suitable person for it. He must be the bête de souffrance for all the rest. He is the head of a conspiracy. We will crush this head and the limbs will fall of themselves. Besides, the sensitive souls who love nurses' stories and believe in everything, there will be no one who will weep for him. No one will lament his death, but he will be a warning to all. Direct yourself to this, Fouche, and set all the infernal machines of your intrigues in operation that we may put an end to conspiracy. General, only one thing is wanting. It is that I be at the head of the police and have the power in my hands to make my infernal machines effectual. But I have told you that I will appoint you as minister only when you give me incontrovertible proofs that your conspiracies are not the fabric of your own fantasy. Very well, General. Now that we are at one, I am prepared to give you these proofs. I have told you that the Royalists and Republicans have united for the purpose of taking your life. They have chosen 50 men by ballot in foreign parts who are to come to Paris and accomplish here the great work of your destruction. These 50 assassins have arrived in Paris, and their chief men had an interview yesterday with the chiefs of the conspiracies here. Fouche, cried Bonaparte with a threatening voice, think well what you are saying. You are playing for the stake of your own head. If these 50 assassins are creatures of your own imagination, it is you who will have to pay for it. These 50 men have been in Paris since the day before yesterday, rejoined Fouche quietly. They came hither by different roads and appearing like simple travellers, and yesterday they had their first interview with the chief of the Republican party. Who is this chief? Name him, or I will call you a liar and impostor. This chief, said Fouche slowly and measuring every word, this chief is General Moreau. Bonaparte uttered a low cry. An ashy paleness suffused his cheeks. He pressed his lips together, and his eyes flamed out such darts of rage that even Fouche trembled and lowered his gaze. Moreau, muttered Bonaparte after a long pause. Moreau, a conspirator, a traitor. Moreau in an alliance with assassins whom the royalists are sending out against me. I knew very well that he was my enemy, but I did not think that his enmity would lead him to be a murderer. He walked up and down with quick steps, his hands folded behind his back, then stopped short before Fouche and looked him full in the face. Fouche, do you abide by your assertion that Moreau is a conspirator? I abide by it, General. And those 50 assassins whom the royalists have sent are in Paris? Yes, General, they are in Paris, and Georget and Pichegru are their heads. Fouche, cried Bonaparte, clinching his fist and raising it threateningly. Fouche, so sure as God lives, I will have you hanged as a traitor if you have lied. General, as surely as God lives, I have spoken the truth. I came here to show you what I am and what Rainier is. I have waited here till the whole nets of these conspiracies should be spread out and be fully complete. The time has come when I must speak, and now I say to you, General, take some steps, for there is danger on foot. Bonaparte, trembling with emotion, had thrown himself into an armchair, and took, as was his custom in moments of the greatest excitement, his penknife from the writing desk and began to whittle on the back of the chair. Fouche stood leaning against the wall and looked with complete calmness and an invisible smile at this singular occupation of the general, when the door of the cabinet was opened and the Mameluke, Roaston, appeared at the entrance. Consul, he said softly, Councillor Riel is again here and pressingly desires an audience. Bonaparte rose and threw away the knife. Riel, he cried in a low tone. The man who was summoned immediately appeared at the open door. A tall, grave personage, with a face so pale and distorted that Bonaparte noticed it despite his great agitation. What is it, Riel? He asked eagerly. Have you spoken with the condemned man? Yes, General, I have spoken with him, whispered Riel with pale lips. And it is, as I said, is it not? This Dr. Curol has only pretended to be able to make great disclosures, only to prolong his own life a few hours. He has poisoned his wife in order to marry his mistress, and the poisoner is executed. General, cried Fouche, almost with an air of joy, I knew Curol, and I knew that his wife poisoned herself. Curol is not the poisoner. What is he then, Monsieur Omniscience? General, he is a conspirator. A conspirator? Repeated Bonaparte, and now his troubled face turned again to the councillor. Riel, what do you know? What did the condemned man say to you? Consul, he swore that he was innocent of the death of his wife, but he acknowledged himself a member of a conspiracy, the object of which is to murder General Bonaparte. He asserts that the Royalists and Republicans have allied themselves, that 50 emissaries of the Count de Lille and Duc d'Enghien, Pichegru, and Georget, at their head, have crept into Paris, that they had an interview yesterday with General Moreau and with the so-called Louis XVII, who is secreted in Paris, and that at this hour those 50 men are prowling around the streets of the city and are watching the Tuileries, waiting for an opportunity to kill the first consul. The troubled eye of Bonaparte turned slowly from the pale face of Councillor Riel to the calm, sagacious face of Fouche, which guarded itself well from expressing any token of triumph and satisfaction. The consul then walked slowly through the room and with his foot pushed open the door leading into the great reception room, in which at this hour every day all the dignitaries of the Republic were assembled to receive the orders of Bonaparte. Murat! Cried Bonaparte loudly, and at once the person summoned, General Murat, at that time governor of Paris, appeared at the door of the cabinet. Murat, said Bonaparte in tones which he issued his commands in on the battlefield, give orders at once that the gates of Paris be closed, and that no stranger be allowed to go out of the city till you have further orders. You will come to me in an hour and receive a proclamation to your soldiers, which you will sign. Have it printed and posted at the street corners of Paris. Make all these preparations. Go! Murat withdrew from the room with a salutation of deference, and now the commanding voice of Bonaparte summoned his chief adjutant from the reception-room. Duroc, said the first consul with calm, almost solemn voice, you will go with 12 soldiers in pursuit of General Moreau, and arrest him wherever you find him. The noble, open face of Duroc grew pale and put on an expression of horror and amazement. "General," he whispered, "I beg that but this time Bonaparte would not listen to the soothing words of his favourite. No replies," he thundered. "You have only to obey, nothing more." Duroc, pale and agitated, withdrew, and Bonaparte closed the door of the cabinet. "Rial," he said, "return to the prison of the condemned man. Take him his pardon and bring him to me, that I may hear him myself. Hasten!" Rial withdrew, and Bonaparte and Fouche remained alone. "You have given your proofs, Fouche, and now I believe you. When wolves are to be hunted down, you are a good bloodhound, and we will begin the chase. I make you from this moment chief of the secret police. Your first duty will be to bring this matter to an end and help me to tear to pieces the whole murderous web, your reward being that I will nominate you again Minister of Police." Footnote: the appointment of Fouche as the chief of police took place in June of the year 1804. "I will fulfil my promise so soon as you shall have made good yours, and put me in possession of the chief conspirators." "You have just arrested Moreau, General," replied Fouche deferentially. "I give you my word that in a few hours Pichereau and Georget will be apprehended." "You forget the chief person," cried Bonaparte, over whose brazen forehead a thundercloud seemed to pass. "You forget the caricature of buried royalty, the so-called King Louis XVII. Hush! I tell you, I will have this man. I will draw out the fangs of this royal adder so that he cannot bite any more. Bring the man before me. The Republic is an angry goddess and demands a royal offering. Give this impostor into my hands, or something worse will happen. Go, and I advise you to bring me, before the sun goes down, the tidings that this fabled King Louis is arrested, or the sun of your good fortunes is set forever. Now away. Go out through the little corridor, and then through the secret gate. You know the way. Go." Fouche did not dare to contradict the imperative order, but softly and hastily moved toward the curtain which led to the gloomy anteroom, and thence through a door which only those initiated knew how to open, and which led to the little corridor. But scarcely had Fouche entered this little dismal room when a hand was laid upon his arm, and a woman's voice whispered to him, "I must speak to you at once. Come, this way." The hand drew him forward to the wall, a door sprang open without a sound, and the voice whispered, "4 stairs down. Be careful." End of chapter 31, part 2. Read by Julie Jackson, Staffordshire, 7th of July, 2021. Book 6, Chapter 32 of Marie Antoinette and Her Son. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach. Josephine. Fouche did not hesitate. He followed his guide down the little staircase, along the dark corridor, and up another short staircase. He had recognized the voice, and knew that his leader was no other than Josephine, the wife of the first consul. Through the secret door at the end of the corridor they entered a small and gloomy antechamber, exactly like the one which adjoined the cabinet of the consul, and from it Josephine ushered Fouche into her cabinet. "You will say nothing to Bonaparte about this secret way, Fouche," said Josephine with a gentle, supplicatory tone. "He does not know of it. I have had it made without his knowledge while he was in Boulogne last year. Will you swear to me that you will not reveal it?" "I do swear, madame." "God knows that I have not had it made out of curiosity to overhear Bonaparte," continued Josephine. "But it is necessary sometimes for me to know what is going on, and that when the general is angry, I should hasten to him to calm him and turn aside his wrath. I have warded off many a calamity since this private way was opened, and I have been able to overhear Bonaparte. But what have I been compelled to listen to today? Oh, Fouche, it was God himself who impelled me to listen. I was with him when you were announced, and I suspected that your visit purported something unusual, something dreadful. I have heard all, Fouche, all, I tell you. I know that his life is threatened, that 50 daggers are directed toward him. Oh God, this perpetual fear and excitement will kill me. I have no peace of mind, no rest more. Since the unhappy day when we left our dear little house to live in the Tuileries, since that day there has been an end to all joy. Why did we do it? Why did we not remain in our little Luxembourg? Why have we been persuaded to live in the palace of the kings? It is proper for the greatest man in France to live in the house where the departed race of kings once had their home, replied Fouche. Oh yes, sighed Josephine, I know these tricks of speech with which you have turned the head of my poor Bonaparte. Oh, you, his flatterer, you who urged him on, will bear the blame if misfortune breaks in upon us. You have intoxicated him with the incense of adulation. You poured into his veins daily and hourly the sweet poison which is to destroy our happiness and our peace. He was so good, so cheerful, so happy, my Bonaparte. He was contented with the laurels which victory laid upon his brow. But you continued to whisper in his ear that a crown would add new grace to his laurels. You flattered his ambition, and what was quietly sleeping at the bottom of his heart, and what I hushed with my kisses and with my hand, that you took all efforts to bring out into the light. His vanity, his love of power. Oh, Fouche, you are wicked, cruel, and pitiless. I abhor you, all, for you are the murderers of my Bonaparte. She spoke to all this softly with quick breath, while the tears were streaming over her beautiful face, and her whole frame trembled with emotion. She then sank, wholly overcome, upon a lounge, and pressed her small hands, sparkling with jewels, over her eyes. Madame, you are unjust, replied Fouche softly. If you have overheard my conversation with the first consul, you are aware that the direct object of my coming was to save him from murderers and to ensure his precious life. And moreover to pour into his ear the poison of a future imperial crown, said Josephine indignantly. Oh, I know it. With talk of conspiracies and of daggers you urged him on. You want him to be an emperor, that you may be a prince or duke. I see it all, and I cannot prevent it, for he no longer listens to me. He no longer heeds the voice of his Josephine, only that of his ambitious flatterers, and he will put on the imperial crown and complete our misfortune. Oh, I knew it! The imperial crown will ruin us. It was prophesied to me in my youth that I would be an empress, but it was added that it should be for no long time. And yet I should like to live, and I should like to be happy still. You will be so, madame, said Fouche with a smile. It is always good fortune to wear an imperial crown, and your beautiful head is worthy to bear one. No, no, she cried angrily, do not try me with your flatteries. I am contented with being a beloved and happy wife. I desire no crown. The crowned heads that have dwelt in the Tuileries have become the prey of destruction, and the pearls of their diadems have been changed to tears. But what advantage is it that I should say all this to you? It is all in vain, in vain. I did not bring you to talk of this. It was something entirely different. Listen, Fouche, I cannot prevent Bonaparte's becoming an emperor, but you shall not make him a regicide. I will not suffer it. By heaven and all the holy angels, I will not suffer it. I do not understand you, madame. I do not know what you mean. Oh, you understand me very well, Fouche. You know that I am speaking of King Louis XVII. Ah, madame, you are speaking of the impostor who gives himself out to be the orphan of the temple. He is it, Fouche. I know it. I am acquainted with the history of his flight. I was a prisoner in the conciergerie at the same time with Toulon, the Queen's law servant. He knew my devotion to the unhappy Marie Antoinette. He entrusted to me his secret of the Dauphin's escape. Later, when I was released, Tallien and Barras confirmed the story of his flight and informed me that he was secreted by the Prince de Conde. I have known it all, and I tell you I knew who Kleber's adjutant was. I inquired for him after he disappeared at the Battle of Marengo, and when my agents told me that the young king died there, I wore mourning and prayed for him. And now that I learn that the son of my beautiful queen is still alive, shall I suffer him to die like a traitor? No, never. Fouche, I tell you, I will never suffer it. I will not have this unfortunate young man sacrificed. You must save him. I will have it so." "I?" cried Fouche in amazement. "But you know that it is impossible, for you have heard my conversation with the consul. He himself said the Republic demands a royal victim. If it is not the so-called King Louis, let it be the Duc d'Enghien, for a victim must fall in order to intimidate the royalists and bring peace at last." "But I will not have you bring human victims," cried Josephine. "The Republic shall no longer be a cruel Moulouk, as it was in the days of the guillotine. You shall, and you must, save the son of Queen Marie Antoinette. I desire to have peace in my conscience, that I may live without reproach, and be happier, perhaps, than now." "But it is impossible," insisted Fouche. "You have heard yourself that if, before the sun goes down, Louis be not imprisoned, the sun of my good fortune will have set. And I told you, Fouche, that if you do this, if you become a regicide a second time, I will be your unappeasable enemy your whole life long. I will undertake to avenge on you the death of the Queen and her son. I will follow your every step with my hate, and I will not rest till I have overthrown you. And you know well that Bonaparte loves me, that I have influence with him, and that what I mean to do I accomplish at last by prayers, tears, and frowns. So do not exasperate me, Fouche. Do not make me your irreconcilable enemy. Save the son of the king whom you killed. Conciliate the shades of his unhappy parents. Fouche, we are in the cabinet of the Queen. Here she often tarried. Here she often pressed her son to her heart and asked God's blessing on him. Fouche, the spirit of Marie Antoinette is with us, and she will know it if you in pity spare the life of her son. Marie Antoinette will accuse you at the throne of God and plead with God to show you no compassion if you refuse to be merciful to her son. Fouche, in the name of the Queen, on my knees, I implore you, save her son." And Josephine, her face bathed in tears, sank before him and raised her folded hands suppliantly to Fouche. The minister, deeply moved, pale with the recollections which Josephine awakened within him, stooped down to her and bade her rise. And when she refused, and begged, and threatened, and wept, his obstinacy was at last touched, or perhaps his prudence, which counselled him to make a friend rather than an enemy out of the all-powerful wife of the future emperor. "Rise, madame," he said. "What mortal is able to resist your request, since Bonaparte himself cannot? I will save your protégé, whatever shall come to me afterward from it." She sprang up, and in the wildness of her joy threw her beautiful arms around Fouche's neck and kissed him. "Fouche," she said, "I give you this kiss in the name of Queen Marie Antoinette. It is a kiss of forgiveness and of blessing. You swear to me that you will save him?" "I swear it, madame." "And I swear to you that as soon as he is saved and Bonaparte's anger can no longer reach him, I will confess all to my husband, and put it in such a light that Bonaparte shall thank and reward you. Now tell me, how will you save him?" "I shall only be able if you will help me, madame." "I am ready for anything, that you know well. Tell me what I shall do." "You must yourself direct a few lines to the young man, conjuring him in the name of his mother to fly, to save himself from the anger of the first consul, to leave Europe." "Oh, Fouche, how sly you are," said Josephine sadly. "You want my handwriting in order to justify yourself to the first consul in case of emergency. Very good. I will write the billet." She hastened to her table, dashed a few words upon paper, and then passed the note to Fouche. "Read it," she said. "It contains all that is necessary, does it not?" "Yes, madame, and you have written it in such beautiful and moving words that the young man will be melted and will obey you. Will you now have the goodness to put the note in an envelope and to address it?" She folded it and put it into an envelope. "To whom shall I address it?" she then asked. "Address it to King Louis XVII." She did so with a quick stroke of the pen and handed the letter to Fouche. "Take it," she said. "It is your justification. And in order that you may be entirely secure," she continued with a slight smile, "retain this letter yourself. What I would say to this young man, I would rather communicate by word of mouth." "How?" cried Fouche. "You want to see and speak with the king," she said sorrowfully, "to beg his forgiveness for myself and Bonaparte. Hush, do not oppose me. I am resolved upon it. I want to see the young man." "But he cannot come here, madame, here into the very den of the lion." "No, not here, into the desecrated palace of the kings," she answered bitterly. "No, he cannot come here. I shall go to him." "You are jesting, madame. It is impossible. You, the wife of the first consul, you will. I want to fulfill a duty of gratitude and of loyalty, Fouche. In my heart, I still feel myself the subject of the queen. Let me follow the call of my heart. Listen. My carriage stands ready. I was intending to drive to my friend, Madame Tallien. I will take a pleasure drive instead. In the Bois de Boulogne, I will cause the carriage to stop, send it away, and return on foot. You will await in there with a fiacre and take me to the king." "It shall be so," said Fouche. "You shall be my law. I only ask that you hasten, for you know well that I have much to do today. I shall take advantage of the time to procure for the young man the necessary passports for travel. But, madame, you must help him leave the city, for you know that the gates are all closed. I will tell Bonaparte that I am troubled to be in the city, now that it is so shut in. I will drive out to Saint-Cloud. His carriage can follow mine, and if the gatekeeper puts hindrances in the way, I will command him to let Louis pass. Now, let us hasten." An hour later, Josephine, after dismissing her equipage with the servants, entered the fiacre which was waiting for her near the fountain. Fouche received her there, and was unwearied in his complaints of the poor carriage which the wife of the first consul must use. Josephine smiled. "My dear sir," she said, "there have been times when I should have been very proud and very happy to have had such a fiacre as this, and not to have been compelled to walk through the muddy streets of Paris. Let it be as it is. The present days of superfluity have not made me proud, and I have a vivid recollection of the past. But tell me, Fouche, whither are we driving, and where does the young king live?" "We are driving, if you graciously approve of it, to my house, and I have brought the young man there, for in his own house he is no longer safe. I have had it surrounded by agents of the secret police, with orders to arrest him on his return. He will, of course, not return, and it will be easier to assume the appearance that he received an intimation of his peril and escaped in season. But here we are before my door, and if you will draw the thick veil which happily you have fastened to your bonnet carefully before your face, I hope that no one will see that the most beautiful lady in Paris honors my house with her distinguished presence." Josephine made no reply to this flattery, but drew the black lace veil closely over her face and hastened to leave the fiacre and entered the house. "Fouche," she whispered as she ascended the staircase, "my heart beats as violently as it did when I drove to the Tuileries to be presented to Marie Antoinette. It was the first time that I spoke with the Queen of France." "And now, madame," said Fouche with a smile, "you will speak with the last King of France." "Does he know who I am?" "No, madame. I have left it to you to inform him. Here we are at the saloon. He is within. Wait only a moment, Fouche. I must collect myself. My heart beats dreadfully. Now you may open the door." They entered the little saloon. Josephine stood still near the door, and while she hastily removed her bonnet and the thick veil and handed them to Fouche, her large, brilliant brown eyes were turned to the young man who stood in the window niche, his hands calmly folded over his breast. In this attitude, with the calm look of his face, the gentle glance of his blue eyes, he bore so close a resemblance to the pictures which represented Louis XVI in his youth that Josephine could not repress a cry of surprise and hastened forward to the young man who now advanced out of the window recess. "Madame," he said, bowing low before this beautiful and dignified lady, whom he did not know, but whose sympathizing face made his heart tremble. "Madame, doubtless you are the lady whom Monsieur Fouche said I might expect to meet here." Yes, I am she, replied Josephine with a voice trembling with emotion, her eyes flooded with tears, all the while being fixed on the grave, youthful face which brought back so many memories of the past. I have come to see you and to bring you the greetings of a man whom you loved, who revered you, and who died blessing you. Of whom do you speak? Asked Louis, turning pale. Men called him Toulon, whispered Josephine. Queen Marie Antoinette termed him Fidèle. Fidèle, cried Louis in a tone of anguish. Fidèle is dead, my deliverer, he whose fidelity and bravery released me from my dreadful prison. Oh, madame, what sad thoughts do you bring back with his name? Josephine turned with a triumphant look to Fouche, who was still standing behind her in the neighbourhood of the door. Her look said, You see, he is no traitor. He has stood the proof. Fouche understood the language of this look perfectly, and a smile played over his features. Then Josephine turned again to the young man. You did not know that Toulon was dead? She asked softly. How could I know it? He cried bitterly. I was taken at that time to a solitary castle where I remained several years, and then I went to Germany, and from that time I have always lived in foreign parts. Since I have been in Paris, I have made the effort to learn something about him, but no one could inform me, and so I solaced myself with the hope that he had really gone to America, for that was his object, as the other gentleman who assisted me in my release informed me at that time. This other gentleman, said Josephine softly, was the Baron du Chachet, and the child who was carried into the temple was the son of the Comte de Frotte, rejoined Louis. Fouche, it is he, cried Josephine. It is the son of my noble, unfortunate Queen Marie Antoinette. O sire, let me testify my homage to you as becomes a subject when she stands before her king. Sire, I bow my knee before you, and I would gladly pour out my whole life in tears, and with each of these tears beg your forgiveness for France, for us all. And the beautiful, passionate Creole sank upon her knee, and raised her tearful eyes to the young man who, perplexed and blushing, gazed at her, then hastily stooped to her and conjured her to rise. No, sire, she cried, not until you tell me that you have forgiven me, that you have forgiven us all. I forgive you? What have I to forgive in you? Monsieur Fouche, who is this lady who knows me and my destinies, and who brings me greetings from Fidèle? What have I to forgive in her? Who is she? Tell me her name. Monsieur, said Fouche, slowly approaching, this lady is— Hush, Fouche. I will tell him myself, interrupted Josephine. Sire, when your beautiful, exalted mother was still living in Versailles, I had the honour to be presented to her, both at the grand receptions and at the minor ones. One day, it was already in the unhappy reign of terror, when the Queen had left Versailles and Trianon, and was already living in the Tuileries, I went thither to pay my respects. That is to say, madame, cried Louis, you were a brave and loyal woman, for only the brave and the loyal ventured then to go to the Tuileries. Or speak on, speak on. You wanted to pay your respects to the Queen, you were saying. She received you, did she not? You were taken into the little saffron saloon? No, sire, the Queen was not there. She was in the little music hall, and because at that time etiquette was no longer rigidly enforced, I was allowed to accompany the Marchioness du Tourzel into the music room. The Queen did not notice our entrance, for she was singing. I remained standing at the door and contemplated the wondrous picture that I saw there. The Queen, in a simple white dress, her light brown, slightly powdered hair concealed by a black lace headdress, sat at the spinet on which her white hands rested. Near her, in the window niche, sat Madame, engaged with her embroidery. Very near her sat, in a little armchair, a boy of 5 years, a lovely child with long golden locks, with large blue eyes, and looking like an angel. The little hands surrounded by lace wristbands leaned on the support of the chair, while his looks rested incessantly upon the countenance of the Queen, and his whole child's soul was absorbed in the gaze which he directed to his mother. The Queen was singing, and the tones of her soulful voice resound still in my heart. The song was this: Dors, mon enfant, close ta paupière, tes cris me déchirant le cœur. Dors, mon enfant, ta pauvre mère a bien assez de sa douleur. And while she sang, she turned her head toward her son, who listened to her, motionless and as if enchanted. See, cried Madame, the sister of the pretty boy, I believe Louis Charles has fallen asleep. The child started up, and a glowing redness suffused his cheeks. Oh, Teresa, he cried, how could anyone go to sleep when my Mamma Queen was singing? His mother stooped down to him, pressed a long kiss upon his brow, and a tear fell from her eyes upon his golden hair. I saw it, and involuntarily my eyes filled. I could not hold back my tears, and went softly out to compose myself. Sire, I see you still before me, this beautiful Queen and her children, and it is with me today as then. I must weep. And I, oh my God, and I, whispered Louis, putting both his hands before his quivering face. Even Fouche seemed moved. His lips trembled and his cheeks grew pale. A long pause ensued. Nothing was heard but the convulsive sobbing of the young man, who still held his hands before his face and wept so violently that the tears poured down in heavy drops between his fingers. Sire, cried Josephine with a supplicatory voice, sire, by the recollection of that hour, I conjure you, forgive me that I now live in those rooms which Marie Antoinette once inhabited. Oh, it has not been my wish, and I have done it only with pain and grief. Believe me, sire, and forgive me that I have been compelled to live in the palace of the kings. He took his hands from his face and gazed at her. You live in the Tuileries? Who are you? Madame, who are you? Sire, I was formerly Viscountess Beauharnais. Now I am the wife of the first consul, exclaimed the prince, drawing back in terror. The wife of him who is pursuing me, and who, as Fouche says, means to bring me to the scaffold. Oh, sire, forgive him, implored Josephine. He is not wicked, he is not cruel, but circumstances compel him to act as he does. God himself, it would seem, has chosen him to restore with his heroic sword and his heroic spirit peace and prosperity to this unfortunate land, bleeding from 1,000 wounds. He was the saviour of France, and the grateful nation hailed him with paeans, and full of confidence laid the reins of government in his hands. Through his victories and his administration of affairs, France has again grown strong and great and happy. And yet he is daily threatened by assassins. Yet there are continual conspiracies whose aim is to murder the man to whom France is indebted for its new birth. What wonder that he at last, to put an end to these conspiracies and these attempts upon his life, will, by a deed of horror, inspire the conspirators with fear. He is firmly resolved on this. The lion has been aroused from his calmness by new conspiracies, and the shaking of his mane will this time annihilate all who venture to conspire against him. Sire, I do not accuse you. I do not say that you do wrongly to make every attempt to regain the inheritance of your fathers. May God judge between you and your enemies. But your enemies have the power in their hands, and you must yield to that power. Oh, my dear, unfortunate, pitiable lord, I conjure you, save yourself from the anger of the first consul, and from the pursuers who have been sent out to seek you. If you are found, you are lost, and no one in the world will then be able to save you. Fly, therefore, fly, fly while there is still time. Fly, cried the young prince bitterly, evermore fly. My whole life is a perpetual flight, a continuous concealment. Like the wandering Jew, I must journey from land to land. Nowhere can I rest, nowhere find peace. Without a home, without parents, without a name, I wander around, and, like a hunted wild beast, I must continually start afresh, for the hounds are close behind me. Well, be it so then. I am weary of defying my fate longer. I surrender myself to what is inevitable. The first consul may send me as a conspirator to the scaffold. I am prepared to die. I shall find that peace in death, at least that life so cruelly denies me. I will not fly. I will remain. The example of my parents will teach me how to die. Speak not so, exclaimed Josephine. I have pity on me, have pity on yourself. You are still so young. Life has so much for you yet. There remains so much for you to hope for. You must live, not to avenge the death of your illustrious parents, but to make its memory less poignant. Son of kings, you have received life from God and from your parents. You may not lightly throw it away, but must defend it, for the blessing of your mother rests upon your head, which you must save from the scaffold. You must live, said Fouche, for your death would bring joy to those who were the bitter enemies of Queen Marie Antoinette, and who would be your mocking heirs. Will you grant to the Count de Lille the uncontested right of calling himself Louis XVIII, the Count de Lille who caused Marie Antoinette to shed so many tears? The prince flamed up at this, and his eyes flashed. No, he cried, the Count de Lille shall not have this joy. He shall not rest his curse-laden head upon the pillow with the calm consciousness that he will be the king of the future. My vision shall disturb his sleep, and the possibility that I shall return and demand my own again shall be the terror that shall keep peace far from him. You are right, madame. I must live. The spirit of Marie Antoinette hovers over me and demands that I live, and by my life avenge her of her most bitter enemy. Let it be so, then. Tell me, Fouche, whither shall I go? Where shall the poor criminal hide himself whose only offence lies in this, that he is alive, and that he is the son of his father? Where is there a cave in which the poor hunted game can hide himself from the hounds? Sire, you must away into foreign lands. The arm of this first consul is powerful, and his eagle eye scans all Europe, and would discover you at any point. You must for the present find a home beyond the sea, said Fouche, approaching nearer. I have already taken measures which will allow you to do so. There are ships sailing southward from Marseille every day, and in one of these you must go to America. America is the land of freedom, of adventures, and of great deeds. You will there find sufficient occupation for your spirit and for your love of work. It is true, said Louis with a bitter smile. I will go to America. I will find a refuge with the savages. Perhaps they will appoint me as their chieftain and adorn my head with a crown of feathers instead of the crown of gold. Yes, I will go to America. In the primeval forests with the children of nature, there will be a home for the exile, the homeless one. Madame, I thank you for your sympathy and your goodness, and my thanks shall consist in this, that I subject myself wholly to your will. You loved Queen Marie Antoinette, a blessing on you and all who love you. He extended both his hands to Josephine, and as she was about to press them to her lips, he stooped toward her with a sad smile. Madame, bless my poor brow with a touch of those lips which once kissed the hand of my mother. Josephine did as she was asked, and a tear fell from her eyes upon his fair hair. Go, sire, she said, and may God bless and protect you. If you ever need my help, call upon me, and be sure that I will never neglect your voice. An hour later, the wife of the first consul drove out to Saint-Cloud. At the corner of the Rue Saint-Honore, a second carriage joined her own, and a young man who sat in it greeted Josephine deferentially as she leaned far out of the carriage to return his salute. At the barriers, the carriage stopped, for the gates of the city were still closed, but Josephine beckoned the officer of the guard to her carriage, and fortunately he knew the wife of the first consul. It is not necessary, said Josephine with a charming smile. It is not necessary that I should procure a permit from the first consul to allow myself and my escort to pass the gate. You do not suppose that I and my secretary, who sits in the next carriage, belong to the villains who threaten the life of my husband? The officer, enchanted with the grace of Josephine, bowed low and commanded the guard instantly to open the gate and allow the two carriages to pass. and so the son of the queen was saved. For the second time he left Paris to go forth as an exile and an adventurer to meet his fate. End of chapter 32. Read by Julie Jackson, Staffordshire, 7th of July, 2021.
Chapter 33 of Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maggie Travers in Columbia, Tennessee. Chapter 33. After Long Wanderings. For the city of Paris, the 16th of February, 1804, was a day of terror. The gates remained closed the whole day. Military patrols passed through the streets, at whose corners the proclamations were posted, by which Marat, the governor of Paris, announced to the city that 50 assassins were within the walls, intent on taking the life of the first consul. The condemned surgeon, Queyrol, had meantime made his confession, and named the heads of the conspiracy and their accomplices, and, only after all the persons mentioned by him were arrested, were the gates of the city opened. A great trial then commenced of the men who had been sent by the Bourbons for this nefarious purpose. Among the accused were General Pichegru, the abettor of Georges, and General Moreau, the most prominent of all. The history of this trial was enveloped in obscurity, and it was faintly whispered that Pichegru had taken his own life in prison, and more faintly yet was it rumored that he was secretly dispatched in prison. And then, on one of these days, there were to be seen all through Paris only pale, sad faces, and a murmur of horror ran through all the streets and all the houses. The story was current that the Duc d'Enghien, the grandson of the Prince de Condé, had been arrested by French soldiers at Baudin, beyond the frontier, and had been brought to Vincennes; that he was accused there that same night of being an accomplice in a plot to take the life of the first consul, and to disturb the peace of the Republic; that he was quickly condemned by a court-martial, and shot before morning within the fortress of Vincennes. The report was only too true. Bonaparte had kept his word. He had sacrificed a royal victim to the threatened cause of the Republic. He would, by one deed of horror, fill the conspirators with fear, and cause them to abandon their bloody plans. The means employed were cruel, but the end was reached which Bonaparte hoped to attain, and thenceforth there were no more conspiracies against the life of the first consul, who, on the 18th of May that same year, declared himself emperor. A few days after this, the public trial of the accused began, which Fouche attended as a reinstalled minister of police, and over which Régnier presided in his new capacity of chief judge. 17 of those indicated were condemned to death, others to years of imprisonment, and among these was General Moreau. But the popular voice declared itself so loudly and energetically for the brave general of the Republic that it was considered expedient to heed it. Moreau was released from prison and went to the Spanish frontier, whence he sailed to North America. On the 25th of June, 12 of the conspirators, Georges at their head, were executed. The other 5, who had been condemned to death, had their sentence commuted to banishment. The gentle, kind-hearted Josephine viewed all these things with sadness, for her power over the heart of her husband was waning, and the sun of her glory had set. Her prayers and tears had no longer a prevailing influence over Bonaparte, and she had not been able to avert the death of the Duc d'Enghien. "I have tried all means," she said with tears to Bourrienne, the chief secretary of the emperor. "I wanted at all costs to turn him aside from his dreadful intention. He had not apprised me of it, but you know in what way I learned it. At my request he confessed to me his purpose, but he was steeled against my prayers. I clung to him. I fell on my knees before him. 'Do not meddle with what is none of your business,' he cried angrily as he pushed me away from him. "These are not women's affairs. Leave me in peace." And so I had to let the worst come, and could do nothing to hinder it. But afterward, when all was over, Bonaparte was deeply affected, and for several days he remained sad and silent, and scolded me no more when he found me in tears. The days passed by, the days of splendor, and then followed for Josephine the days of misery and grief. Repelled by Napoleon, she mourned 4 years over her spurned love and her ruined fortunes. But then, when Napoleon's star went down, when he was robbed of his imperial crown and compelled to leave France, Josephine's heart broke, and she hid herself in her grave in order not to witness Napoleon's humiliation. And thus the empire was abolished, and the Count de Lille, called back by foreign potentates, and not by the French nation, in order, as Louis XVIII, to re-erect the throne of the Lillies. And where all this time was the son of Queen Marie Antoinette? Where was Louis XVII? He had kept his word which he gave to Josephine. He had gone to the primeval forest and to the savages, and they had given him a crown of feathers and made him their king. For years he lived among them, honored as their king, loved as their hero. Then a longing for his country seized him, and going to Brazil in the service of his people, he made use of the opportunity to enter into a contract with Don Juan, and not return to his copper-colored tribe. The precious treasure which he possessed, his papers, he had been able to preserve all during the journeys and amid all the perils of his life, and these papers procured him a hospitable and honorable reception with Don Juan. From him the king without name or inheritance learned the changes that had meanwhile taken place in France, and, at the first opportunity which offered, he returned to Europe, arriving at Paris in the middle of the year 1816. The Prince de Condé, now the Duc de Bourbon, received the wanderer with tenderness, but with deep regret, for now it was too late, and his hope for a restoration of the returning prince could rest on no basis. The Count de Provence was now King Louis XVIII, and never would he descend from his throne to give back to the son of Marie Antoinette that crown which he wore with so much satisfaction and pride. Much more simple and easy was it to treat the pretender as a lunatic or as an adventurer, and to set his claims aside forever. Useless were all the letters which the Baron de Richemont, the name that Louis still bore, addressed to his uncle the king, to his sister the Duchess d'Angoulême, imploring them for an interview. No answer was received. No audience was granted to this adventurer whose claims could not be recognized without dethroning Louis XVIII and destroying the prospects of the crown for the Duchess's son, the Duc de Berry. Louis XVII had died, and he could not return to the living. He saw it, he knew it, and a deep sorrow took possession of him. But he rose above it. He would not die, he would live, a terror and an avenger to his cruel relatives. But it was a restless life that the son of the Queen must lead, in order to protect himself from the daggers of his powerful enemies. The Prince de Condé conjured him to secure himself against the attacks which were more than once upon the Baron de Richemont, and Louis gave heed to his requests and tears. He travelled abroad, but after returning in 2 years from a journey in Asia and Africa, on landing on the Italian coast, he was arrested in 1818 at the instigation of the Austrian ambassador at Mantua, and confined in the prison of Milan. 7 years the unhappy prince spent in the Austrian prison, without once being summoned before a judge. 7 years of solitude, of darkness, and of want. But the son of Marie Antoinette had learned in his youth to bear these things, and his prison life in Milan was not so cruel as that in the Temple under Simon. Here there were at least sympathizing souls who pitied him, Even the turnkeys of the prison were courteous and kind when they entered the cell of the King of France. And one day, beyond the wall of his apartment, was heard a voice singing, in gentle, melodious tones, a romanza which Louis had composed and written on the wall when he occupied the neighboring cell. This voice, which sounded like a greeting from the world, was that of Silvio Pellico, the celebrated author of Les Mille Prigioni, relates in touching words this salutation of his neighbor. "My bed was carried," he said, "into the new cell that was prepared for me, and as soon as the inspectors had left me alone, my first care was to examine the walls. There were to be seen there some words, recollections of the past, written with chalk, with pencil, or with a sharp tool. I found there also 2 pretty French lines, which I am sorry I did not copy. I began to sing them to my melody of the poor Magdalen, when a voice near me responded with another air. When the singer ended, I called out 'Bravo!' He replied with a polite salutation, and asked me if I was French. 'No, I am Italian, and am called Silvio Pellico.' 'The author of Francesca da Rimini?' 'Yes, the same.' And now there followed a courtly compliment, with the usual regrets for my imprisonment. He asked in what part of Italy I was born, and when I told him in Saluzzo, in Piedmont, he awarded the Piedmontese some words of high praise, and spoke particularly of Bodoni. His compliments were brief and discriminating, and disclosed a finely cultivated mind. 'And now, sir,' said I, 'allow me to ask you who you are.' 'You were just singing a song that I wrote.' 'These pretty verses here upon the wall, are they yours?' 'Yes, they are.' 'You are, therefore, the Duc de Normandie.' The watchman was just then walking past my window, and so I was still. After some time we resumed our conversation. When I asked whether he was Louis XVII, he responded in the affirmative, and began to declaim hotly against Louis XVIII, his uncle, the usurper of his rights. I implored him to give me his history in brief outlines. He did so, and related to me all the details connected with the life of Louis XVII, which I knew only in part. He told me how he had been in prison with Simon the cobbler, been compelled to sign a calumniating charge against his mother, etc. He then related to me the story of his escape and his flight to America, of his return to reclaim the throne of his fathers, and his arrest in Mantua. He portrayed his history with extraordinary life. All the incidents of the French Revolution were present before him. He spoke with natural eloquence, and wove in piquant anecdotes very apropos. His manner of expression smacked once in a while of the soldier, but there was no lack of the elegance that disclosed his intercourse with good society. 'Will you allow me,' I asked him, 'to treat you as a friend, and leave off all titles?' 'I want exactly that,' he answered. 'Misfortune has taught me the good lesson to despise all the vanities of earth. Believe me, my pride does not lie in this, that I am a king, but that I am a man.' After this we had long conversations morning and evenings, and I recognized in him a noble, beautiful soul, sensitive to all that is good. He knew how to win hearts, and even the turnkeys were kind to him. One of them said to me on coming from the cell of my neighbor, 'I have strong hopes that he will make me chief porter when he is king. I have had the boldness to ask him for the position, and he has promised it.' To the veneration of the turnkeys for the king of the future, I owe it that one day when I was led to trial, and had to pass by his cell, they opened the doors that I might see my illustrious friend. He was of medium size, from 40 to 45 years of age, somewhat imponent, and had a thoroughly Bourbon physiognomy. After 7 years of imprisonment, the gates opened at last for the Baron de Richemont, and he who had been placed there without the sentence of a judge was released with as little show of authority. The son of the Queen was free again. The death of King Louis XVIII had restored him to the walks of men. But another king of France assumed his place at once, and the Count d'Artois ascended the throne under the title of Charles X. The poor Baron de Richemont bore his sorrows and his humiliation into the valleys of Switzerland. But when, In the year 1830, King Charles X abdicated the throne. The son of Marie Antoinette again came forth from his solitude, issued a proclamation to the French people, and, in the presence of all Europe, demanded his inheritance. Yet, amid the clash of weapons and the roar of revolutions, the voice of the unfortunate prince was overborne. He had no soldiers, no cannon, to enforce silence and make himself be heard. But the Duc d'Orléans, Louis Philippe, had soldiers and cannon, and the arms of his dependents, and the magic of his wealth, placed him upon the throne in July 1830. The poor Baron de Richemont, the son of kings, the last of the Bourbons in France, had now a single friend, who perhaps would receive him. This friend was the Duc de Bourbon, Condé, now an old man of 80 years. One day, some weeks after the accession of Louis Philippe, the Duc de Bourbon received at his palace of Saint-Leu a gentleman whom nobody knew, who announced himself as a Baron de Richemont. The Duke went out into the anteroom, greeted his guest with the greatest deference, and led him into his cabinet. There the two gentlemen carried on a long and earnest conversation, and the secretary of the Duke, who was at work in the library hard by, distinctly heard his master say with trembling tones, "Sire, I implore you, forgive me. The circumstances were stronger than my will. Sire, go not into judgment with me. Forgive me." To this an angry voice replied, "No, I will not forgive you, for you have dealt perfidiously with the son, as you did once with the mother. You have not redeemed the oath that you once gave me. I leave you. May God be gracious to you and pardon you. Take care that he does not punish you for the treachery that you have shown to me. You swore that you would acknowledge no other king but me, and yet you have taken your oath to the third king. Farewell. May the Almighty protect you. We shall see each other perhaps in a better world, and there you will have to give your account to a judge whom nothing can mitigate. Be happy, and may the dead sleep in peace." The secretary then heard the forcible closing of a door, and all became still. After an hour he entered the Duke's cabinet, because the silence troubled him. The old Duke sat in his armchair, pale, and gazing with constant looks at the door through which the stranger had departed. He was reticent the whole day, and in the night following his valet heard him softly praying and weeping. On the next morning, August the 27th, 1830, on entering the sleeping-room of his master, he found him dead and already rigid. The Duke had hanged himself at the window of his own room. The last dependent of the unhappy king, who still bore the name of the Pretender, was dead, as were all his relations, including his sister, the Duchess d'Angoulême. But from the dead there came a greeting. She had ordered a large sum to be paid yearly to the Baron de Richemont, and the report was that she wished to recognize him on her deathbed as her brother. But her confessor had counseled her that such a recognition would introduce new contentions among the Bourbons, and given the Pretender Henry V equal claims with Louis XVII. Yet the Duc de Normandie was not silent. He spoke so loudly of his rights, that Louis Philippe at last held it advisable to arrest him and bring him to trial. The preliminary investigation continued 15 months. Then he was brought before the court, and accused of conspiracy against the safety of the state. The Gazette des Tribunaux of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November, 1834, gave the details of this trial. Spectators poured in from all sides, and also, in an unexpected manner, witnesses who declared themselves ready to prove the identity of the Baron de Richemont with the Duc de Normandie, son of Louis XVI. The accused appeared entirely calm and dignified before the bar, and when the counsel for the government accused him of appropriating a name that did not belong to him, he asked quietly, "Gentlemen, if I am not Louis XVII, will you tell me who I am?" No one knew how to reply to this question, but many eminent legitimists had come to solely declare that the accused was in truth their king, and that he was the rescued orphan of the Temple. Even the president of the court seemed to be convinced of this, and his closing words in addressing the jury were these: "Gentlemen, who is the accused who stands before you today? What is his name, his lineage, his family? What are his antecedents, his whole history? Is he an instrument of the enemies of France, or is he, much more, an unfortunate who has miraculously escaped the horrors of a bloody revolution, and laid under banes by his birth, has now no name and no refuge for his head?" The jury, however, were not called upon to answer this question. They had simply to reply to the question whether the accused was guilty of a conspiracy against the state. This they answered with a guilty, and condemned the accused to an imprisonment of 12 years. The Duc de Normandie, or King Louis Charles, as we may choose to call him, was taken to Saint-Pélagie. But during the next year, through the assistance of powerful friends, which his trial had gained over to him, he was released from prison, and again spent some quiet years in Switzerland. Then came the year 1848, the year of revolutions, whose storm waves drove Louis Philippe to England, never to ascend again the throne of France. Again Louis Charles issued from his solitude, and this time not alone. A swarm of rich and powerful legitimists thronged around him. A journal, La Flexible, was secured to the interest of the Duc de Normandie, and La Vendée, with 1,000 loyal voices, summoned King Louis XVII to herself. There, as he was on the point of hastening to his faithful ones, God laid his hand upon him and held him back. A stroke of paralysis crippled his limbs. After recovering from this attack, the strength of his mind was taken away, and the decided, fiery, indefatigable pretender became a gentle, pious monk, who fasted and prayed, and wandered to Rome to have an interview with Pope Pius IX, and received absolution from him for all his sins. The Pope met the Duc de Normandie at Gaeta on the 20th of February, 1849, and had a long and secret conversation with him. And when Louis Charles withdrew, it was as a quiet, pious, smiling man, who never denied his high extraction, but who had no longer a wish to be restored to the inheritance of his fathers. More and more he withdrew from the world, and lived only in the circle of a few noble-born legitimists, who had never addressed him excepting as sire. He accepted the title as one that was his due, and never refused it even when approached by many adherents of the new Napoleonic dynasty. At that time he wrote to his friends, "You ask me what I wish, what the end of my struggle is, which has now lasted more than half a century. I will tell you. You do not suppose, I trust, that I am still determined to ascend the throne of France. To do this would be a great misfortune for me, but it would certainly be a greater one for France, and it would rightly be said of both of us that we merit our misfortune. Still less do I hope to attain to wealth and high station by being recognized. You know that I need very little for my support, and that this little is amply provided for. What else should I strive for? To avenge myself? My friend, I am at an age when the blood flows slower through the veins, and when one finds an inexpressible charm in forgiving. What then do I wish? What could I have? Why do I incessantly strive? This is the reason, my friend. I should like, before my death, to convince all who have disinterestedly believed in me, that it is not a political adventurer, but the royal orphan of the temple who owes them his friendship and gives them his gratitude." And this last goal of his life was within his reach. The friends and legitimists who surrounded him believed in him, and when he died his dependents and servants mourned for him as for a departed king. They bore him with solemn pomp to his grave at the dead of night. Some 50 persons followed his coffin, and a priest went before it. He was buried in the churchyard Villefranche. and his tombstone bears the following inscription: Here rest Louis Charles of France, born at Versailles, March the 27th, 1785, died in the Château of Vaux-Renault, August the 10th, 1858. End of chapter 33. Recording by Maggie Travers in Columbia, Tennessee. End of Marie Antoinette and Her Son by Luise Mühlbach.